They built cities without cranes, carved temples without iron, charted the stars without telescopes. And then, they vanished. All across the world, the ruins remain, monoliths of stone swallowed by jungle, empty roads leading to nowhere, and silent temples whose gods no longer answer. Who were these people who once thrived, who raised empires from dust, only to disappear into it? The answers are scattered in fragments, in half-buried artifacts, forgotten scripts, and stories whispered across centuries. Some fell to conquest, others to famine or flood. But a few left no trace of their fall. No war, no plague, no reason. The questions echo louder than the ruins themselves. What really happened to the Cucuteni Tripilia, who burned their own cities every generation? Why did the people of Cahokia abandon their vast metropolis? And what caused the sudden silence of the Nabateans, masters of desert stone? These are the mysteries history left behind. And tonight, we're going to follow their trails into the shadows of the past. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the forgotten world of ancient civilizations that just disappeared. In the scorched plains of southern Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates once cradled the world's first cities, there lies a hushed and broken land. Sand sweeps over low mounds and forgotten ruins, the only sound a dry wind curling through the skeletal remains of mud brick walls. Here, beneath layers of time and silt, rests the shadow of Eridu, arguably the oldest city in human history. Eridu. The name lingers like an echo from before time began. According to ancient Sumerian records, this was the very first city, founded by the gods themselves. In the Sumerian king list, a text part myth, part chronicle, Eridu is listed at the top. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. Long before Babylon, long before Ur or Akkad, there was Eridu, its temples rising from marshy soil, its ziggurat dedicated to Enki, the god of wisdom, water, and magic. But today, Eridu is dust. How could the very cradle of civilization, the supposed birthplace of kingship, of architecture, of myth, simply vanish? What could drive the first city into oblivion? Archaeological excavations at Eridu, near modern-day Tel Abu Shahrain in Iraq, have revealed 18 successive temple layers stacked atop one another. Each new layer was a reconstruction of the temple of Enki, built over the last. This practice, continuing for centuries, suggests a city of deep cultural continuity, of sacred persistence. But around 600 BC, the record stops. No more rebuilding, no final destruction layer, just abandonment. Why? The mainstream explanation is environmental. Eridu, like many early Mesopotamian cities, relied heavily on proximity to marshlands and the ebb and flow of rivers. Over centuries, the climate changed. The water receded. The fertile wetlands that once nourished the city turned to arid land. The nearby Euphrates shifted course, leaving Eridu without its lifeblood. As the city's strategic and agricultural value declined, its people may have slowly migrated to more hospitable regions, leaving their ancient capital behind, not in violence or panic, but in resignation. Yet even this calm disappearance raises unsettling questions. Why would a city so sacred, so steeped in ritual and divine mythology, be so easily forsaken? Why no ceremonial farewell, no final homage in the tablets or texts of neighboring cities? Some scholars suggest a shift in political power. Eridu, once dominant, was eventually overshadowed by cities like Uruk and Ur. As trade routes changed and dynasties rose and fell, Eridu's influence may have simply eroded. Kings turned their attention elsewhere. Pilgrims stopped coming, priests left their posts, and over time, the holy site of Enki was reduced to an empty ziggurat crumbling under the weight of sun and silence. But not everyone is satisfied with this slow decay narrative. Some fringe theorists have proposed more unorthodox ideas. Could Eridu's decline have been part of a deliberate erasure? After all, Sumerian myths often speak of divine punishment, of cities flooded or cursed by the gods. Was there something about Eridu, its rituals, its secrets, that later rulers sought to bury? Others point to the mythology surrounding Enki himself. As the god of deep waters and hidden knowledge, Enki was both revered and feared. His temple, the E-Abzu, was believed to sit above the subterranean waters of wisdom and chaos. Could there have been some event, a flood, a sinkhole, a symbolic disaster, that made the site spiritually taboo? And then there are those who question whether Eridu was even meant to survive. In some interpretations of Sumerian cosmology, Eridu wasn't just the first city, it was a prototype, a divine model destined to fade once its blueprint was cast. In this view, its disappearance wasn't a failure, but a fulfillment. Still, for all the theories, one fact remains. Eridu existed. It rose from the marshes, thrived for over 4,000 years, and then was gone. What remains is eerily still. Satellite images show a faint outline of walls and the square core of the old ziggurat. Scattered pottery shards speak to lives once lived here. Priests, farmers, scribes, children. But no tombs of kings, no inscriptions of downfall, no record of war or famine. Only silence. Was it a quiet ending? A slow death from thirst? Or something more deliberate, an intentional fading from the story of civilization? We may never know. The winds of the desert do not speak. The ruins lie flat and low, as if even time has chosen to forget. And yet, in that forgetting, something stirs, a question that will not go away. If the world's first city can disappear without a trace, what else have we already lost? What else lies buried beneath our feet, waiting to be remembered? And so, the mystery of Eridu endures, quiet, unresolved, and profoundly human. As the morning mist lifts off the shimmering waters of the Persian Gulf, a chain of low, sun-drenched islands emerges, quiet and unassuming. Today, this is the modern kingdom of Bahrain. But thousands of years ago, this tranquil landscape was something else entirely. To the ancients, it was the heart of a land both real and mythic, a place called Dilmun. According to the oldest Sumerian texts, Dilmun was more than a city. It was a paradise, a land where sickness did not exist, where death held no dominion, and where the gods themselves once walked among mortals. In the tale of Enki and Ninhursag, Dilmun is described as a pure and sacred place, blessed, abundant, and untouched by sorrow. It was here, the myths say, that life began. But Dilmun was not just a legend, it was real. Archaeological remains, centered around Bahrain's Qalat al-Bahrain and extending into parts of eastern Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, reveal a civilization deeply connected to the sea and trade. By around 3000 BC, Dilmun had become a vital node in the ancient world, linking the powerful Mesopotamian city-states with the distant Indus Valley. Copper from the mountains of Oman, precious stones, timber, and exotic goods all passed through Dilmun's harbors. It grew wealthy not by conquest, but by connection, thriving at the crossroads of continents and cultures. Its influence is seen in ancient seals bearing distinct iconography, in burial mounds spread across the desert, and in temple ruins built with a precision that suggests both engineering skill and spiritual purpose. Hundreds of thousands of burial mounds, some small and modest, others vast and elaborate, still dot the northern part of Bahrain, silent witnesses to a complex society that honored its dead with care and ceremony. And yet, for all its prosperity and prominence, Dilmun disappears. By the end of the first millennium BC, its name fades from written records. Trade slows. The monumental burial practices cease. The temples are no longer rebuilt. A once flourishing civilization recedes into the background of history, leaving behind only scattered remnants and half-forgotten myths. Why? One explanation lies in shifting trade dynamics. As new powers rose in Mesopotamia and Persia, and as maritime routes adapted to changing priorities, the Gulf may have lost its central importance. Ports that had once been busy with merchants and goods became quiet. Without the constant exchange of commerce, the economic lifeline of Dilmun may have simply withered. Others point to internal decline, perhaps driven by overextension, political fragmentation, or dynastic struggles. A civilization built on balance might not have needed a catastrophe to collapse. A slow, gradual erosion could have been enough. Communities may have migrated inland, been absorbed by rising empires, or simply left as the surrounding opportunities dwindled. But even these explanations feel incomplete. For a land described as divine, its exit from the world stage is remarkably quiet. There are no records of conquest, no signs of destruction, no laments carved into stone. The disappearance of Dilmun feels more like a vanishing act than a fall. Could its sacred image have worked against it? Some historians speculate that as Dilmun's religious significance declined, so too did its perceived importance. As temples lost their centrality and the gods associated with the land faded from worship, the need to preserve or remember Dilmun may have diminished. In time, memory gave way to myth. The real place became a story, and the story became a symbol. Others suggest that Dilmun may not have been a single unified civilization, but rather a network of coastal communities bound by trade and belief. If so, its disappearance may not have been a collapse, but a slow merging into the larger cultures that surrounded it. In this view, Dilmun didn't end, it was simply absorbed. And then there are the more speculative ideas. Some fringe researchers have proposed that the mythic aspects of Dilmun hint at lost knowledge, rituals or beliefs so sacred that later civilizations deliberately concealed them. Others have gone further, wondering whether Dilmun's association with divine origins and purity was rooted in something deeper, an ancient center of knowledge or spiritual practice that left few traces because it was never meant to be found. Even the burial mounds raise questions. Why so many? Why such consistency in design over so many generations? Were they purely funerary, or something more? And what of the sea? Some believe that rising water levels or changing tides may have gradually submerged important parts of the Dilmun heartland. Harbors might have silted up. Islands could have eroded or shifted. Over centuries, even subtle environmental changes might have altered the coastline enough to isolate once thriving settlements. But no dramatic evidence of a flood or disaster has ever been found. Perhaps that's what makes Dilmun so elusive. It didn't burn, it didn't fall, it faded. Today, its ruins lie quiet beneath the dust and stone of modern life. The burial fields, the temples, the sea-washed foundations of old harbors, they wait in silence. And still, the myths linger. A land where no one grew old, a land where pain did not exist, a land now forgotten. Was Dilmun a real place crowned in myth, or a myth grounded in fleeting reality? The question remains unanswered, the mystery unresolved. And as we continue this journey through the civilizations that vanished without a trace, one truth echoes clearly. The past is not gone. It is merely waiting, buried just beneath the surface. As the wind sweeps across the highlands of eastern Ethiopia, it whispers through the jagged hills and overgrown ruins of a forgotten world. The air is thin here, dry and ancient, scented with dust and mystery. Scattered among the stones are fragments of walls, broken pottery, collapsed tombs, and the remains of once proud structures. These are the ruins of Harla, the so-called City of Giants. Far from the deserts of Mesopotamia or the shores of the Persian Gulf, the story of Harla feels different, isolated, quiet, but no less compelling. For nestled deep within the Horn of Africa lies the ghost of a kingdom that once flourished, traded, built, and thrived, before vanishing without a clear trace. Who were the Harla? According to local traditions, they were a powerful and advanced people, known for their skill in stonework and their mysterious disappearance. Oral histories speak of them with reverence and with fear. Some believe they were giants. Others say they possessed knowledge lost to time. Whatever the truth may be, the archaeological evidence paints a picture of a sophisticated urban society that existed between the 6th and 15th centuries AD. The ruins around Harla, near Dir Dawa, have yielded clues: intricately carved tombs, elaborate mosques, fortified walls, and imported ceramics from Persia, India, and even China. These findings suggest that Harla was more than an isolated town. It was a node in a vast trading network that spanned the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, a place where African, Arab, and Asian cultures met, and where wealth and influence flowed through market stalls and caravan routes. And yet, despite all this, Harla disappeared. No written records survive to explain why. No known annals document its decline. There are no tales of conquest, no evidence of cataclysm. One day, it seems, the city was there, and the next, it wasn't. Mainstream archaeologists propose a gradual abandonment. As trade routes shifted and new powers like the Sultanate of Ifat and later the Adal Sultanate rose in the region, Harla may have been left behind, its influence diminished, its people absorbed. Political shifts, resource depletion, or migration might have drained its vitality slowly, leaving the city vulnerable to time and decay. But this explanation raises its own questions. Why was there no continuation of settlement nearby, no transition to a successor city? Why were some structures left incomplete, as if work had suddenly stopped? Why does Harla occupy such an important place in oral lore, more as a myth than a memory? Some suggest that disease could have played a role, an epidemic that swept through the population, forcing abandonment. Others theorize that Harla may have suffered from internal collapse, perhaps social unrest or conflict with neighboring groups. But so far, there is little concrete evidence to support either idea. And then there are the legends. For centuries, local communities have referred to the site as being built by giants. Enormous stone blocks used in Harla's construction do seem disproportionate, unusual for the region. Could the people of Harla have developed advanced engineering techniques now lost to time? Or is this the language of myth, a way for later generations to explain something they could not understand? In some traditions, the Harla are said to have angered divine forces, bringing ruin upon themselves. In others, they are described as having vanished into the earth, swallowed by the land they once ruled. These stories, while not historical, echo a recurring pattern seen across ancient sites. When a culture disappears too completely, legend rushes in to fill the void. One particularly intriguing aspect of Harla is its architecture. Some of the tombs feature domed chambers and intricate inscriptions. Others contain layered burials, suggesting not just local customs, but foreign influence or multicultural integration. A few artifacts even show connections with early Islamic civilizations, raising the possibility that Harla was part of a religious and economic network that extended far beyond Ethiopia's borders. If so, what caused this network to collapse? And why was Harla, a city seemingly thriving and well-connected, left to the wilds? It is worth noting that much of Harla's story remains untold. Excavations have only recently begun in earnest. Many of its structures are still buried beneath centuries of earth. Tombs remain sealed. entire quarters of the city are unexplored. The silence of Harla is not necessarily final. It may simply be incomplete. But until more answers are uncovered, the mystery remains. A city of trade, suddenly still. A people of legend, suddenly gone. Stones shaped by hands we no longer know, standing in a land that has forgotten the names of those who raised them. Did the Harla vanish quietly as empires shifted? Or did something more profound, something more elusive, lead to their disappearance? The ruins do not speak, but they endure. And perhaps, in the patterns of their silence, something waits to be found. As we move from the lost city of Harla to the next civilization swallowed by time, one thought lingers. How many more worlds lie just beneath the dust, waiting to remind us that even the grandest of societies can fade into whispers? High in the windswept expanse of the western Tibetan plateau, where the air grows thin and the silence stretches for miles, jagged cliffs loom over ancient stones. Here, amid desolate valleys and sacred peaks, the bones of a forgotten kingdom lie buried in shadow. Walls made of mud brick and rock crumble against the sky. Broken fortresses cling to mountainsides, their watchtowers staring across an empty landscape. This is the land of Zhang, one of the least understood civilizations in Asia, and one that vanished with barely a trace. Before Tibet became the spiritual heartland of Buddhism, before its monasteries dotted the cliffs and prayer flags fluttered across mountain passes, the kingdom of Zhang ruled these lands. Mysterious, remote, and shrouded in legend, it flourished in western Tibet and parts of the Himalayas from around 1500 BC, perhaps even earlier. Its people developed a culture rooted in ritual, astronomy, and a deep connection with the mountains that surrounded them. Zhang's heart was believed to be the sacred mountain of Kailash, a site still revered today by Buddhists, Hindus, Jains, and followers of the ancient Bon religion. In Zhang tradition, Kailash was not just a mountain, it was the axis of the world, a celestial pillar connecting heaven and earth. And at its base, the capital city of Kyunglung is said to have once thrived, with palaces carved into the cliffs and stone temples aligned to the movements of the stars. But almost nothing remains of Kyunglung. Its name lingers in texts, its walls lie in ruins, and the kingdom it once governed has vanished. What happened to Zhang? Historically, it is known that by the 7th century AD, Zhang was conquered by the rising Tibetan Empire under Songtsen Gampo. The Bon religion, deeply rooted in Zhang culture, was gradually replaced or absorbed by Tibetan Buddhism. Political control shifted, fortresses were abandoned, temples collapsed, and over time, the name Zhang disappeared from the chronicles. But that is only part of the story. Archaeological evidence is scarce and scattered. The harsh terrain, extreme altitude, and centuries of erosion have buried much of Zhang beneath layers of time and silence. What we do know comes from ancient manuscripts, oral traditions, and a few fragile remnants of architecture. Texts written in the lost Zhang script describe rituals, cosmology, and kings whose names are barely pronounceable today. But they offer little in the way of concrete history. Some researchers believe the kingdom's fall was not merely military. The collapse of trade routes between Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent may have left the highland society isolated. Without access to goods, ideas, or alliances, it may have withered slowly, losing its influence long before its final annexation. Others suggest internal decline. Harsh climate, resource scarcity, or even spiritual disillusionment may have weakened the kingdom from within. The high-altitude plateau, while majestic, is unforgiving. Agriculture is limited. Winters are brutal. Survival requires more than faith. Yet even these explanations fail to fully explain the near-total disappearance of such a once powerful civilization. Why was so little preserved? Why do the ruins seem so few, the records so fragmented? Why do we know so much about those who came after, and so little about those who came before? That's where the mystery deepens. In Bon tradition, Zhang is not simply a historical kingdom, it is the birthplace of sacred knowledge. Some adherents claim that it was home to ancient wisdom far older than recorded history. Rituals involving breath, energy, and consciousness that predate Tibetan Buddhism by centuries, perhaps millennia. According to these beliefs, the disappearance of Zhang was not a defeat, but a transformation. The outer kingdom collapsed. The inner teachings endured. Some legends go further. They speak of hidden valleys and underground cities, secret sanctuaries where Zhang sages preserved their knowledge away from the eyes of invading armies. Mythical lands like Shambhala, said to lie somewhere beyond the snow peaks, may have roots in these ancient traditions. Were these metaphors, or encoded references to places still undiscovered? Other theories, more speculative still, suggest that Zhang's alignment with celestial events, its temples built to mirror star movements, may hint at a society far more advanced in astronomical understanding than previously believed. Some researchers have proposed that the kingdom's sudden disappearance could be linked to a cosmic event, an eclipse, a comet, or a change in sky patterns that was interpreted as an omen, prompting mass migrations or ritual abandonment. There are even those who wonder whether the fall of Zhang was not a loss at all, but a decision. A quiet retreat from a world no longer in harmony, a civilization that chose to dissolve rather than be conquered, to vanish into the mountains and legends rather than be rewritten by history. Today, what little remains is mostly hidden. Crumbling walls, isolated cave complexes, manuscripts buried in remote monasteries. Pilgrims still circle Mount Kailash in reverence, unaware that beneath their feet may lie the ruins of a lost capital. And the Bon practitioners who carry the last echoes of Zhang's voice continue their rituals, quietly, as they have for generations. Was Zhang simply absorbed by a rising empire? Or was there something more, something sacred, secret, and forgotten? As we step away from the silent ruins of this mountain kingdom and continue our search for civilizations swallowed by time, one question lingers in the high, cold air. What if some cultures didn't disappear, but chose to hide? In the rocky heartlands of southern India, where boulders tower like monuments shaped by ancient gods, a forgotten city lies scattered across the plains. Stone temples rise from the earth like frozen echoes of devotion. Colossal pillars stand in silence, their intricate carvings weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Granite elephants, broken yet proud, guard abandoned courtyards. This is Hampi, the ghost of Vijayanagara, once among the richest and most dazzling empires the world had ever seen. At its peak in the 15th and 16th centuries AD, the Vijayanagara Empire was a marvel of urban planning, culture, and power. Stretching across most of South India, it stood as a bulwark against northern invasions, a defender of regional identity, and a beacon of wealth and scholarship. Foreign travelers from Persia, Portugal, and beyond described its capital as breathtaking, its markets bustling with precious stones, its palaces glittering under the sun, and its temples echoing with sacred chants. And yet today, it lies in ruin, vast, empty, and still. What happened to Vijayanagara? The fall of the empire, according to historical records, came swiftly. In 1565 AD, a coalition of Deccan sultanates defeated the empire's forces at the Battle of Talikota. The loss was catastrophic. Within days, the victorious armies descended upon the capital. What followed was not merely conquest, it was obliteration. Hampi was looted, burned, and left in smoldering devastation. The city that once dazzled with gold and gemstones became a graveyard of stone. That, at least, is the accepted narrative. But like many endings in history, this one raises more questions than it answers. Was a single defeat enough to erase an empire of such scale and complexity? Why did no significant attempt arise to rebuild the capital or reclaim its former glory? And why, in the aftermath of its fall, did Vijayanagara disappear not just physically, but culturally, politically, and almost spiritually, from the memory of the subcontinent? The ruins themselves offer few answers. Spread across more than 25 square kilometers, Hampi is a vast open-air puzzle. Temples still stand, dedicated to gods once worshipped by emperors and peasants alike. Aqueducts and canals trace the ingenuity of forgotten engineers. Market streets, though silent, suggest trade that once rivaled the greatest cities of the time. And yet, there are no signs of reconstruction, no indication of prolonged resistance or survival. It's as if the empire, after centuries of splendor, simply turned to dust. Some historians argue that Vijayanagara was too centralized around its capital. Once Hampi fell, the administrative heart was gone. The political structure could not adapt. Without a capital, the empire had no anchor, and the remaining regions quickly fragmented under pressure from local rivals and foreign powers. Others see a more gradual decline, beginning even before the battle. Shifting alliances, court intrigue, and internal divisions may have weakened the empire from within. In this view, the battle was not the cause of the collapse, but its final blow. And then there are the subtler theories. Some suggest that Vijayanagara's fall was not merely a military or political failure, but a spiritual one. The empire had long portrayed itself as divinely sanctioned, its rulers seen as protectors of Dharma and sacred order. The sacking of Hampi was not just a loss, it was a cosmic rupture. In the minds of its people, the sacred geography had been desecrated. To rebuild might have been seen not as restoration, but as sacrilege. There are even stories, quiet ones, passed down in villages and old texts, that hint at a retreat rather than a defeat. That the empire's core traditions, its knowledge, and perhaps even its leaders, were not destroyed, but concealed. Some believe that secret enclaves preserved the teachings, the rituals, the spirit of Vijayanagara in hidden corners of the south, not in marble and monuments, but in memory, language, and lineage. And as with so many ruins, myth seeps into the stones. Locals speak of hidden chambers beneath the temples, of buried treasures cursed to protect their secrets, of tunnels leading deep beneath the earth, where voices still echo at night. Most dismiss these as legends, but like the empire itself, they endure, half remembered, half believed. Today, Hampi is a haunting landscape. The silence here is not empty, it hums with something unresolved. The wind carries the weight of stories never fully told. As you walk among the fallen pillars and weathered shrines, you can almost feel time hesitate, as though the city is not truly gone, but waiting. Waiting for what? Perhaps for someone to see it not just as a ruin, but as a question. How does an empire that ruled millions, that cultivated art, music, science, and philosophy, vanish so completely in a matter of days? And what truths might still lie buried beneath the stones, silent, undisturbed, watching? As we move on from the sun-baked ruins of Vijayanagara to the next lost world, one mystery remains. Can greatness ever truly vanish? Or does it only sleep beneath the ruins we've yet to understand? Off the northwest coast of Africa, where volcanic cliffs rise dramatically from the Atlantic Ocean and winds whisper through barren lava plains, lies an archipelago both beautiful and haunted. These are the Canary Islands, sun-drenched today, but once the cradle of a lost culture. In the remote highlands of Tenerife and the shadowed ravines of Gran Canaria, traces still linger. Caves carved into cliffs, petroglyphs etched in stone, silent burial mounds. These are the echoes of the Zanata people, an ancient civilization that vanished long before the world learned to remember them. Before the Spanish conquest in the 15th century, the Canary Islands were home to indigenous cultures whose origins remain uncertain. Among them were the Zanata, believed to be among the earliest inhabitants of the archipelago. Most of what we know comes from the island of Tenerife, where their descendants were later referred to as the Guanches. But long before these final chapters were written, the Zanata had built a society that remains deeply enigmatic. Who were they? Some archaeologists link the Zanata to North African Berber populations. Linguistic similarities between ancient Canarian words and Tamazight dialects suggest a prehistoric migration, perhaps by seafaring peoples or island-hopping shepherds from the Atlas Mountains. Yet how these early settlers reached the Canaries, isolated by hundreds of kilometers of open ocean, remains a mystery in itself. Were they driven by exploration, exile, or something more spiritual? Once here, the Zanata developed a life shaped by the extremes of the islands. They lived in caves and stone huts. They herded goats, harvested wild plants, and crafted pottery marked with geometric designs. Their society was organized into clans, and their spiritual life centered around mountain worship, ancestor reverence, and celestial observation. They mummified their dead with care, burying them in caves high in the mountains, as if placing them closer to the sky. But for all their resourcefulness, they left no written records, and no clear explanation for what happened next. By the time the first European ships approached the Canary Islands in the 14th century, much of what might have been Zanata culture had already fragmented. Some islands showed signs of population decline. On others, entire settlements had been abandoned. The people who remained, though still holding on to ancient rituals and oral traditions, spoke of a time when their ancestors lived differently, ruled differently, as if a deeper layer of history had already faded from memory. Why? Mainstream historians suggest isolation and internal pressures may have caused decline long before foreign contact. The islands, while fertile in parts, are also volatile, marked by volcanic eruptions, droughts, and scarce resources. Over time, overgrazing or depletion of key supplies could have stressed communities to the brink. Inter-island conflict may have fractured alliances, cutting off support between groups once bound by blood and belief. But this only explains so much. Why then do so many burial sites remain untouched, their structures undisturbed for centuries? Why do the carvings, strange symbols, spirals, and star-like patterns appear in places with no clear ritual function? And how did a people with no known boat-building tradition reach one of the most isolated island chains in the Atlantic in the first place? Some theories stretch further. Fringe researchers have long speculated about the possibility of pre-Phoenician or even pre-Egyptian voyages to the Canaries. Ancient maps from classical Greece and Rome describe fortunate isles lying far beyond the Pillars of Hercules, lands blessed by nature, untouched by time. Could these be distant memories of Zanata homelands, or distorted echoes of travelers who once encountered them? Others point to mythic connections. In Berber folklore, tales of a mysterious western land abound, ruled by tall people with light eyes, skilled in the old ways. Could the Zanata have preserved a pocket of ancient culture long forgotten on the mainland? Or were they themselves the survivors of some earlier disappearance, clinging to the last outpost of a fading world? One enduring puzzle lies in their funerary customs. The Zanata practiced mummification, a trait shared with few other cultures outside Egypt and the Andes. Their methods were unique, drying bodies with volcanic ash, wrapping them in skins and woven mats, and placing them in remote cave tombs sealed with stone. These practices suggest not only spiritual depth, but a knowledge of preservation rarely seen in prehistoric island societies. Why go to such lengths? What did death mean to them? Some believe these customs were tied to cosmology, that death was not an end, but a transition into a mountain or a star. Others see echoes of beliefs that once stretched across continents, traces of an ancient philosophy that the world has largely forgotten. Today, the Zanata name survives only in fragments, in local myths, in museum labels, in faint inscriptions no one has yet fully deciphered. The people themselves, and the culture they created, have long since faded into the folds of time. Their cave homes are empty, their sacred sites overgrown, their story largely untold. And yet, the land remembers. The mountains still hold the bones of the dead, the wind still whistles through ancient stone. The symbols carved into basalt remain as cryptic as ever, silent but not erased. What drove the Zanata to these islands? And what caused their world to vanish, not with a battle or a fire, but with a whisper? As we leave the lonely cliffs of Tenerife behind and continue through the shadows of forgotten civilizations, one final thought echoes in the surf below. Sometimes, the most profound disappearances leave no ruin, only questions carved in stone. In the baking heat of southeastern Iran, where the Halil River carves a winding path through an arid landscape of dust and stone, an ancient silence lingers just beneath the earth. Here, among the parched plains and forgotten foothills of the Zagros Mountains, fragments of a lost world have begun to surface. Strange stone vessels, carved with animal forms and mythical beings, towering mounds concealing entire cities, and beneath it all, whispers of a civilization that predates the written histories of Sumer, Elam, and Akkad. This is Jiroft, one of the most tantalizing archaeological enigmas of the ancient world. Until the early 2000s, Jiroft was little more than a name, a modest region in Kerman province, largely overlooked by mainstream archaeology. That changed when floods unearthed thousands of artifacts from the soil, drawing the attention of locals, looters, and eventually, scientists. What they discovered beneath the surface was not just a cache of relics, but the faint outline of a forgotten civilization. The artifacts were unlike anything seen before. Finely carved chlorite vessels, some depicting half-human, half-animal hybrids, others etched with symbols no one could yet read. Architectural remains of what may have been monumental structures, and signs of a vast and organized society, possibly flourishing as early as 3000 BC, rivaling or even predating Mesopotamia in complexity. But the real mystery of Jiroft isn't just what was found, it's what had been lost. How does an entire civilization of such apparent sophistication disappear so completely from the historical record? Why did no neighboring power mention its rise or fall? And how could a culture capable of large-scale urban planning and artistic mastery leave so few written traces? Mainstream scholars have offered tentative answers. Some believe Jiroft may have been part of a larger Elamite cultural sphere, absorbed into greater regional powers as political borders shifted and new kingdoms rose. Others suggest that environmental factors, such as earthquakes or river course changes, may have disrupted life in the region, causing a gradual decline and eventual abandonment of its cities. Indeed, the Halil River itself, once a vital artery for agriculture and trade, may have shifted or dried out over time, leaving behind settlements that could no longer be sustained. In a land where survival has always depended on water, even a modest ecological shift could spell the end of a thriving society. And yet, those explanations don't quite capture the scale of what may have been lost. The more researchers uncover, the more complex Jiroft appears to be. Some believe the unknown script found on a handful of tablets may represent an entirely separate writing system, perhaps even older than cuneiform. If true, it would suggest that Jiroft was not merely influenced by its neighbors, but was an independent cradle of civilization in its own right. This possibility has sparked broader, more speculative theories. Could Jiroft represent a missing chapter in human history, a culture that developed in parallel with, or even ahead of, the Sumerians? Was it a forgotten link in the chain that led from prehistoric settlements to the great urban centers of the Bronze Age? And if so, what happened to its knowledge, its beliefs, its people? Some have drawn comparisons between Jiroft and legends of lost cities in the East, kingdoms of immense wealth and wisdom swallowed by time. The detailed carvings, the fantastical creatures, and the apparent reverence for cosmological order have led a few fringe theorists to connect Jiroft with ancient mythologies that speak of sacred knowledge passed down from forgotten ancestors. There are even those who speculate that Jiroft may have served as a crossroads, where nomadic cultures from Central Asia, settled farmers from the Iranian plateau, and early Mesopotamian traders met, exchanged, and inspired one another. If true, then the ruins of Jiroft may hold clues not only about one civilization, but about the very fabric of early human interconnectedness. But despite the intrigue, many questions remain unanswered. The site remains only partially excavated. Looting in the early years stripped many artifacts of their archaeological context, making it difficult to reconstruct timelines or interpret meanings. And without a fully deciphered script or comprehensive architectural map, much of Jiroft's story remains hidden beneath layers of time and dust. Even so, the land seems to remember. Every year, new discoveries emerge: foundation walls, burial grounds, workshops. The picture grows clearer, but also more complex. For each answer, another question arises. What gods did the people of Jiroft worship? What language did they speak? Why did they choose to carve their legends into stone? And why, after all their effort, did the memory of their world fall so completely into silence? As the sun sets over the dusty plains, casting long shadows across the half-buried stones, it's difficult not to wonder what still lies below. What stories remain untold in the dry earth of southeastern Iran? What wisdom was lost when Jiroft disappeared, not with fire or conquest, but with a quiet fading from time itself? And as we journey onward, from the forgotten valleys of Jiroft to the next vanished world, one thought remains. Sometimes, the greatest mysteries are not those we remember, but those we never knew existed at all. As the early morning light breaks over the Khuzestan plains in southwestern Iran, the ruins of Susa begin to stir in the heat, mute, fragmented, and ancient. Cracked columns rise from the earth like fossilized fingers. Mud brick walls fade into the dust, and beneath these scattered remnants lies the ghost of a civilization older than Persia, older even than Babylon. This was the heart of Elam, one of the world's earliest kingdoms, a cradle of power and innovation, whose name is barely whispered in most modern histories. The kingdom of Elam emerged in the shadows of giants. Nestled between Mesopotamia to the west and the Iranian plateau to the east, Elam flourished for millennia, its history stretching as far back as 2700 BC, perhaps even earlier. Its cities, Susa, Anshan, and later Madaktu, became centers of trade, metallurgy, and written language. Its kings ruled over a rich and resilient people, whose artistic and architectural legacy left a quiet but unmistakable mark on ancient civilization. And yet, for all its longevity, the story of Elam ends not in glory, but in silence. How does a kingdom that lasted for over 2,000 years, outliving many of its neighbors, disappear so completely from the memory of the world? Elam was no marginal culture. Its language was unique, unrelated to the Semitic or Indo-European tongues of its neighbors. Its writing system evolved over time, from Proto-Elamite script, still undeciphered, to a more recognizable cuneiform used in later periods. The Elamites developed their own religion, social structure, and diplomacy. They warred with Babylon, influenced the Persian Achaemenids, and were respected and feared by the great powers of their age. So, what happened? By the 7th century BC, Elam had entered its final decline. The Assyrians, in their relentless expansion, invaded and sacked the Elamite cities. Ashurbanipal's inscriptions boast of the destruction of Susa, of temples burned, idols taken, and kings dragged in chains. And from that moment, Elam largely vanishes from the historical record. Was this the end? A violent conquest from which the kingdom never recovered? That is the dominant view, one of military defeat and cultural absorption. But even this answer leaves much unexplained. For a culture as ancient and enduring as Elam, the speed and finality of its disappearance seem strange. Conquered peoples often persist, absorbed, but not erased. Yet, Elamite identity faded almost completely. Its language stopped being written, its gods fell silent, and the cities that once thrived at the edges of empire became provincial backwaters or were abandoned altogether. Why? Some historians propose that Elam's very uniqueness, its language, its traditions, its geographical isolation, may have made it harder to integrate into the rising empires of the Medes and the Persians. As new powers established dominance, Elam may have been seen as a relic, respected but obsolete. Over time, its institutions were replaced, its elites displaced, and its memory overwritten. But even this process raises questions. What became of the Elamites themselves? Did they simply vanish? Or did they melt into the vast tapestry of Persian identity, their legacy hidden in plain sight? And what of the Proto-Elamite script, still undeciphered? What messages lie within those early signs, scratched into clay over 5,000 years ago? Some scholars have wondered whether the Elamites possessed knowledge or traditions that were deliberately suppressed or forgotten. Their early association with metallurgy and ritual has led to speculation about priestly elites, secret rites, and lost cosmologies. Others point to the ambiguity of their origins. Where did the Elamites come from? Their language remains an enigma. No clear relatives, no confirmed lineage. Were they remnants of an even older world? A surviving branch of a now vanished people? There are even those who look to Susa's vast burial grounds and temples and see more than ruins. They see the traces of a different worldview, one not just defeated, but erased. Today, what remains of Elam is buried beneath the layers of later empires. The Achaemenids built atop their cities, the Parthians and Sassanids followed, and in time, the world forgot the kingdom that once stood there. Even the name Elam became little more than a biblical footnote, its true history left to fragments and ruins. But the stones still speak, if only faintly. In Susa's broken halls, on tablets preserved in forgotten vaults, and in the undeciphered marks of the Proto-Elamite script, a voice still lingers. The voice of a people who built, ruled, believed, and endured, until they no longer could. What was lost when Elam fell? Not just a kingdom, but a unique thread in the fabric of human civilization, one whose pattern we may never fully recover. As we leave the sun-baked plains of Khuzestan and journey onward, one question remains suspended in the desert air. If a civilization can thrive for 2,000 years and still be forgotten, how many more have already slipped through the cracks of history, waiting to be remembered? As the dry wind sweeps across the salt flats of Gujarat in western India, it stirs the dust of a forgotten past. Beneath the haze of heat and silence lie the weathered remains of brick walls, precisely laid in geometric alignment. Shallow channels, once used to guide water, now lie parched and empty. And in the heart of these ruins sits a curious structure, stone-lined, rectangular, and eerily preserved. This is Lothal. And what looks like a drained basin may, in fact, be the oldest known dockyard in the world. Over 4,000 years ago, Lothal was a thriving port city, one of the southernmost outposts of the vast and enigmatic Indus Valley Civilization. Strategically situated between the Sabarmati River and the Gulf of Khambat, it served as a critical link between inland settlements and seafaring trade routes stretching as far as Mesopotamia. Artifacts recovered here, carnelian beads, ivory combs, copper tools, and etched seals, suggest a cosmopolitan city engaged in commerce, industry, and ritual. But Lothal was more than a trade hub. Its layout speaks to an advanced sense of urban planning. The city was built on a raised platform with separate zones for residences, workshops, and markets. Drainage systems were meticulously engineered. Brick-lined wells provided fresh water. And then there's the dock, an astonishing feat for its time, complete with sluice gates, spillways, and mooring stones. Its presence implies not only maritime knowledge, but a command of hydraulic engineering rarely seen in Bronze Age cultures. And yet, this city, so carefully planned and purposefully constructed, did not endure. Sometime around 1900 BC, Lothal began to fade. Trade networks dwindled, structures fell into disrepair, and eventually the city was abandoned, left to sink quietly into the alluvial plains, its name and story forgotten for millennia. What caused its decline? One possibility lies in the changing course of rivers. Geological studies suggest that the Sabarmati may have shifted, depriving the dock of its connection to the sea. Silt could have clogged the inlet. Without access to trade, Lothal's economic lifeline may have been severed. If so, its decline may have been slow and inevitable. A city strangled by the very landscape that once nourished it. Others point to environmental degradation. Overuse of natural resources, deforestation, or salinization of farmland may have reduced the city's ability to support its population. And with the broader Indus Valley civilization entering a period of instability, Lothal may have simply fallen victim to larger regional shifts. But some questions remain. If the dock truly served ocean-going vessels, where are the ships? Where are the anchors, the harborside warehouses, the remains of a bustling port economy? Was the basin really a dock, or could it have served another function? Some researchers have proposed that the structure was in fact a large irrigation tank or reservoir used to store water during dry months. Still others point to the uniformity of decline across the Indus civilization. Around the same time that Lothal was fading, cities like Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, and Kalibangan were also being deserted. No evidence of invasion or widespread violence has been found. Instead, the pattern suggests a gradual, almost systemic collapse. Was there a prolonged drought, a breakdown in civic organization, or did a cultural shift cause people to abandon their cities in favor of smaller, more sustainable rural communities? More speculative theories linger at the edges. Some fringe voices have suggested that the Indus people, including those of Lothal, possessed lost knowledge of navigation and astronomy that has yet to be fully understood. The precision of the city's layout, its cardinal orientation, and the sophistication of its dock continue to inspire curiosity. Could Lothal represent a deeper legacy of ancient science, one forgotten not by failure, but by design? Another mystery lies in the script. The Indus script, found on seals and pottery at Lothal and across the civilization, remains undeciphered. Do these symbols record trade transactions, rituals, histories, or warnings? Until the script is understood, much of Lothal's story will remain silent, buried beneath signs we cannot yet read. And then there is the human element. Despite extensive excavation, few human remains have been found at Lothal. Was the population small? Were they buried elsewhere? Or did they leave, en masse, for reasons lost to time? Today, the sun-bleached stones of Lothal sit quietly in the fields. Tourists wander its lanes. Scholars debate its meaning. And yet, the atmosphere here remains charged with a certain gravity, a sense that this was not just a city, but a portal into a civilization that still refuses to fully reveal itself. How could such a meticulously designed city, deeply integrated into global trade networks, vanish without war, without fire, without final words? As we move on from the forgotten docks of Lothal and continue our journey through history's lost worlds, we're left with a question that is as unsettling as it is enduring. How much of our shared past still sleeps beneath the soil, quiet, intact, and waiting to be remembered? In the misty valleys of southeastern Korea, where forested hills roll gently into quiet plains, ancient tombs rise like grassy mounds from the earth. These rounded silhouettes, serene and undisturbed, hold within them the secrets of a once great kingdom. Gyeongju, now a modest city, was once the beating heart of Silla, a realm of gold, poetry, and silent disappearance. The kingdom of Silla, founded in the 1st millennium BC and flourishing until the 10th century AD, was one of the longest-lasting dynasties in East Asian history. Over time, it transformed from a tribal confederation into a highly centralized monarchy, eventually unifying most of the Korean peninsula. Its people crafted exquisite crowns of gold, traded with Tang China, and built temples that shimmered with celestial intent. The capital city, then known as Seorabeol, became a cultural and religious center, a place where Buddhist monks chanted sutras under wooden pagodas, and philosophers debated the shape of the cosmos. And yet, the name Silla is barely known beyond Korea's borders. Its legacy is overshadowed, its story fragmented. A civilization that lasted over 1,000 years disappeared into the folds of history with little fanfare. What happened? The clues lie scattered in tombs and temples, in chronicles both native and foreign. From the 6th to 8th centuries AD, Silla reached a golden age. The unification of the three kingdoms, Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla, under Silla's rule, created a powerful and sophisticated state. Buddhism flourished. Massive temple complexes like Hwangryongsa and Bulguksa rose from the land. The famous Seokgaram Grotto was carved, an artificial cave housing a granite Buddha that gazes into eternity with calm detachment. Trade and diplomacy connected Silla to the wider world. Envoys traveled to the Tang court. Silk, ceramics, and scrolls flowed between Korea and China. Maritime routes carried Silla ships to Japan and beyond. And yet, behind the splendor, cracks began to form. By the 9th century, internal divisions grew. Aristocratic clans vied for influence. Peasant uprisings erupted across the countryside. The centralized authority that once held the kingdom together began to weaken. The royal court, once the center of cultural brilliance, became a stage for factional intrigue. Still, the collapse was not sudden. It was slow, quiet, like a tide receding from the shore. In 935 AD, after years of unrest and rebellion, the last king of Silla formally abdicated. The throne was handed over to Goryeo, a rising power that would come to unify Korea under its own banner. Silla's final bow was dignified, almost graceful. There was no great war, no mass destruction. The kingdom simply stepped aside. But that's where the mystery deepens. Why did a kingdom so rich in culture and intellect fade so completely from the regional spotlight? Why do so few ruins of its capital remain? Why were so many of its temples lost to time? One explanation lies in the nature of its fall. Unlike empires brought down by fire or invasion, Silla's end was administrative, a peaceful transfer. But peace, too, can be erasure. In the transition, monuments were repurposed or neglected. Cultural memory was rewritten under the Goryeo dynasty. What had been sacred became outdated, and Silla's once luminous image was dimmed, not by violence, but by forgetting. Others suggest a more spiritual cause. Some historians and monks have pointed to the kingdom's deep commitment to Buddhism, specifically to the Maitreya tradition, which emphasized a future messianic age. As Silla struggled, many believed the kingdom had spiritually fallen out of harmony with cosmic law, that its dissolution was not failure, but fulfillment, a necessary return to balance before rebirth. There are even stranger theories. Local legends speak of hidden libraries, secret scrolls, and knowledge buried with the kings. The tombs of Gyeongju, some still unexcavated, may hold texts that illuminate what truly occurred during Silla's twilight. Some suggest that the dynasty's elite, fearing desecration, sealed away their history deliberately. Not destroyed, but hidden, waiting for a time when it would be safe to remember. Then there is the question of the tombs themselves. Unlike the grand stone pyramids of Egypt or the towering stelae of Axum, Silla's burial mounds appear modest, grassy, round, and quiet. But beneath them lie wooden chambers filled with treasures, gilded belts, jade ornaments, swords inlaid with gold, and ceramics of impossible delicacy. These objects speak not of decline, but of pride, of care, of reverence. Why such opulence buried in anonymity? Was this humility, or a farewell? Today, the old capital is quiet. The streets of Gyeongju hum softly with modern life. But in the early morning, when the fog drifts low and the tombs cast long shadows, it is easy to imagine the lost kingdom stirring beneath the soil. Easy to believe that Silla is not gone, just resting, waiting to be understood. As we leave the rounded hills and forgotten temples of Silla behind, one last question lingers in the still air. How can a civilization that lasted 1,000 years leave so few voices behind? And what might still lie hidden beneath the earth, waiting to tell its story once more? The Atlantic breeze moves through the ravines of Tenerife like a whisper from another age. Above the cliffs, the volcanic peaks rise stark and silent, their blackened slopes etched with time. Deep in these highlands, in hidden caves and windswept plains, lie the last remnants of a people whose origin remains uncertain and whose story ends not in fire, but in silence. They are the Guanches, the ancient inhabitants of the Canary Islands, and the last known chapter of a civilization that vanished into memory. Before the arrival of European ships in the 15th century, the Canary Islands were home to several distinct yet related cultures. Among them, the Guanches of Tenerife stood out. Isolated in the vastness of the Atlantic, with no known means of open ocean navigation, they developed a society that seemed both archaic and advanced. They lived in caves and stone dwellings, practiced agriculture and animal husbandry, and built sacred sites aligned with the sun and stars. They mummified their dead with methods remarkably complex, wrapping bodies in animal skins and placing them high in dry caves, preserving them for centuries. But perhaps the greatest mystery of all is how they got there. The Canary Islands lie far from the African mainland, separated by rough seas and strong currents. And yet, the Guanches spoke a language related to the ancient Berber dialects of North Africa. Their features, described by early European chroniclers, were tall, often fair-skinned, with light-colored eyes, a description that puzzled outsiders then and continues to stir speculation now. How did a Berber-speaking people reach such an isolated archipelago with no boats? The mainstream theory suggests that their ancestors arrived sometime between 1000 and 500 BC, possibly carried by early Phoenician or Carthaginian sailors who may have abandoned or left settlers on the islands. Over centuries, cut off from the outside world, these settlers adapted to their rugged environment. As maritime knowledge faded and wood became scarce, their seafaring abilities were lost. By the time Europeans arrived, the Guanches had no ships, no contact with other islands, and no memory of how they had first come. But if their history is defined by isolation, it is also shaped by a quiet brilliance. The Guanches constructed step-like pyramids, thought by some to be ceremonial in nature. They developed a whistled language, Silbo Gomero, that could carry across mountains and ravines, allowing them to communicate over vast distances. They understood the rhythms of the land and sea. They revered nature, the sun, the moon, and the spirits of their ancestors. And then, in the span of a few decades, they were gone. In the 1400s, European explorers began their slow conquest of the Canary Islands. The Castilian campaigns were brutal and systematic. Armed with steel, horses, and unfamiliar diseases, the invaders overpowered the Guanches, who resisted with courage, but with stone weapons and little unity. By 1496, the last Guanche stronghold on Tenerife fell. What followed was not just conquest, but erasure. The Guanche language vanished within a generation. Their rituals were outlawed. Survivors were enslaved, assimilated, or displaced. Their bones, once carefully preserved in sacred tombs, were unearthed, studied, or forgotten. What little we know comes from the chronicles of their conquerors, from oral traditions passed through families, and from the mummies, silent witnesses to a lost world. But why did a culture so distinct and enduring disappear so completely? Some historians argue that the collapse was inevitable, a small population with limited resources, overwhelmed by a technologically superior invader. Others suggest the Guanches had already begun to decline before contact, due to inter-island rivalries, environmental strain, or disease. Yet the full picture remains elusive. Archaeological evidence continues to offer surprises. New findings suggest sophisticated knowledge of astronomy. Others point to links with pre-Roman North Africa that have yet to be fully explored. And then there are the questions no one can yet answer. Why do some Guanche burial sites suggest social stratification, while others seem egalitarian? What was the true purpose of their pyramidal structures? And is it possible that memories of their origin stories still lie encoded in the myths of Berber tribes on the mainland? More speculative theories abound. Some claim that the Guanches were remnants of a much older, lost civilization, perhaps survivors of prehistoric maritime cultures forgotten by history. Others suggest they preserved fragments of ancient knowledge brought across the sea long before the age of recorded exploration. These ideas remain controversial, unproven, but they speak to a deeper truth. The Guanches left behind more questions than answers. Today, their presence lingers in place names, in museum collections, and in the bloodlines of Canary Islanders who still trace ancestry to these vanished people. The winds that move through the high caves carry no voices, but the silence is not empty. It waits and watches. How did a people so distant, so distinct, come to settle these islands? And why did their memory fade so swiftly, almost as if someone or something wished it to be forgotten? As we turn away from the volcanic ridges of Tenerife and continue our journey through civilizations lost to time, one question remains. What else lies hidden on the edge of the map, waiting for someone to remember? Across the sweeping grasslands of central Kazakhstan, where the wind rolls unhindered across an open horizon and the sky feels impossibly vast, lie strange arrangements of stone. From the air, they form unmistakable patterns, long rows, concentric circles, and keyhole-shaped enclosures stretching across the steppes like ancient messages carved into the earth. These are the burial sites of the Tasmola culture, a forgotten civilization that once thrived in these silent plains and then vanished. Scattered across more than 300 locations, the stone mounds, known as kurgans, mark the resting places of a people who lived between the 8th and 5th centuries BC. While their name, Tasmola, comes from the site where the culture was first identified, their legacy remains enigmatic. They left no written records, no surviving cities. And yet, their presence is undeniable, etched in stone, buried in earth, and preserved by the stillness of the land. Who were they? The Tasmola people were nomads, yet not merely wanderers. They possessed a refined understanding of astronomy and geometry. Their keyhole-shaped stone constructions often align with celestial bodies, particularly the solstices, suggesting a culture deeply attuned to the skies. Some burial mounds contain elite warriors, buried with weapons, horse remains, and precious ornaments. Others seem more modest, hinting at a stratified society with shared ritual practices. Their craftsmanship was subtle but sophisticated. Artifacts found within the kurgans, bronze daggers, harness fittings, decorated ceramics, speak of a culture at the crossroads of the steppe and the highlands, influenced by both local traditions and wider Eurasian networks. And yet, despite their geographic reach and ceremonial complexity, they seem to appear suddenly and disappear just as quietly. Why? Mainstream archaeological theories suggest that the Tasmola culture may have evolved from earlier steppe societies, such as the Chiribaya culture, before eventually merging into or being overtaken by the Saka and Scythian cultures that came to dominate Central Asia. As these larger nomadic confederations expanded, the distinct identity of the Tasmola may have simply been absorbed, its customs diluted into a broader cultural mosaic. But if that were the whole story, why do the Tasmola sites stand out so sharply? Why the precision in their alignments? Why the consistency in their ceremonial architecture across vast distances? Some researchers believe that the Tasmola were not merely a transitional culture, but something more independent, perhaps guardians of an older, now lost cosmology. Their alignment of burial sites with celestial events is not coincidental. Could it reflect a spiritual worldview that saw the land and sky as a single, interconnected domain? A sacred geography measured in stone and time? Others note the absence of significant settlement structures. Did the Tasmola people live in portable dwellings like yurts, leaving little behind? Or were their daily lives so entwined with the movement of herds and the rhythm of nature that permanence was never the goal? Perhaps the monuments they left were not meant to mark territory, but to anchor memory. The lack of written language only deepens the mystery. Without texts or inscriptions, we are left to interpret their world through material remains and landscape patterns. Are we seeing burial grounds or something more complex, ceremonial calendars, ancestral pathways, or sky maps inscribed into the land? More speculative voices have gone further. Some suggest that the geometric patterns visible from above resemble ancient forms of proto-writing, or even early attempts at recording astronomical phenomena. The idea is controversial, but intriguing. Could the Tasmola have developed a symbolic system lost to time? A way of reading the heavens not in words, but in stones? There are also whispers, found in later Central Asian folklore, of a people who spoke to the stars, who buried their wisdom in the ground, hidden from those who might misuse it. While such stories cannot be taken as history, they reflect a cultural memory of something once powerful, now absent. And then there is the question of the horses. In many Tasmola burials, horses are placed beside their riders, sometimes with ornate bridles, sometimes with the severed heads arranged ritualistically. This reverence for the horse suggests more than practicality. It hints at a sacred bond, Perhaps even a belief in transformation through death. Did they believe their spirits would ride into the afterlife? Or that the horse, like the stars, was a guide between worlds? Today, the wind-swept steppes keep their secrets well. The burial mounds remain undisturbed in many places, unmarked by roads, untouched by cities. Satellite images continue to reveal new alignments, new questions. Excavations are careful, slow, and ongoing. But the story of the Tasmola culture is still largely unwritten. Who were they, these skywatchers of the steppe? Warriors, priests, astronomers, wanderers, or all of the above? As we leave the long shadows of their stone markers behind and journey onward through the forgotten corners of ancient history, one final question echoes across the plains. If a people could map the stars with stones and then disappear without a trace, what else might have been lost, still sleeping beneath the grass and the silence? Along the quiet banks of a narrow river in northern Germany, the Tollense Valley today appears peaceful. Green fields, winding waters, and the soft hum of wind through reeds. But beneath this calm surface lies a landscape that once echoed with the chaos of battle. Spears splintered, bones shattered, and hundreds, perhaps thousands, of warriors clashed in what may be the oldest known large-scale battle in European history. And yet, no one knows who they were. This is the mystery of the Tollense Valley culture. Discovered by accident in the early 1990s and only seriously investigated in the decades that followed, the Tollense battlefield has reshaped our understanding of Bronze Age Europe. Scattered human remains, fractured skulls, broken limbs, embedded arrowheads began turning up in the riverbanks. At first, it was assumed to be the site of a small, isolated skirmish. But as excavations continued, archaeologists uncovered something far more shocking. The remains of hundreds of young men, many killed by violent trauma, strewn across a 2-kilometer stretch of river valley. Some were struck down by bronze-tipped arrows. Others bore signs of sword wounds and blunt force trauma. Horses were found too, suggesting mounted warriors. Wooden clubs, flint arrowheads, and even finely crafted bronze weapons lay among the bodies. This was not a local dispute. It was an organized battle, perhaps even a war. But between whom? The site dates back to around 1250 BC, a time often thought of as fragmented and tribal in northern Europe. The image of Bronze Age societies in this region was, until recently, one of small, scattered communities, modest farmers, herders, and artisans. Yet, the Tollense battlefield tells a different story. Here were trained fighters, moving in formation, with supply lines and strategic coordination. Evidence suggests that many came from far beyond the immediate region, possibly hundreds of kilometers away. How did such an organized conflict erupt at a time when no known states or kingdoms existed in the area? Theories abound. Some suggest that the Tollense Valley was a key trade corridor, linking the Baltic Sea to Central Europe. Control over this route may have been a source of tension, drawing rival factions into violent confrontation. Amber, tin, and bronze were valuable commodities. Perhaps this was a battle for economic dominance, a struggle to control a vital artery in the prehistoric economy. Others point to the broader context. Around this time, Central Europe was experiencing increasing social complexity. Elites were rising. Wealth was being concentrated. Monumental burial mounds were appearing across the continent. Was the Tollense battle part of a larger process? The birth pangs of European proto-states? And still, deeper questions remain. Who organized these fighters? Who led them? Were they defending something? Invading? What happened to the people who lived in the region afterward? Strikingly, there is no trace of a settlement near the battlefield, large enough to explain the scale of the conflict. No clear signs of a fortress, or capital, or central authority. No written records, no names. It is as if an entire society emerged for battle, and then vanished. Some researchers have suggested that the battle may have been part of a larger cultural tradition now lost to history, that the Tollense fighters belonged to a mobile warrior class, perhaps bound not to territory, but to loyalty, custom, or contract. If so, they may have moved between distant regions, hired for protection or conquest, their allegiances hidden in the silence of time. And then there are the more speculative ideas. Could Tollense represent the collapse of a previously unknown Bronze Age power in northern Europe, one that did not leave cities or inscriptions, but held sway through force, wealth, and trade? If so, the battlefield might be the site of its last stand, a forgotten war that erased an entire cultural identity. There is also the haunting possibility that Tollense is not an isolated event, but one of many. That other battlefields lie hidden beneath forests and fields, unrecognized and unexplored. If true, our current map of prehistoric Europe may be missing key chapters, episodes of conflict, movement, and transformation that shaped the continent's future. The bones at Tollense are slowly revealing their stories. Isotope analysis shows that some of the dead grew up in distant regions, possibly in what is now southern Germany or even further afield. Their teeth, their wounds, their weapons, all offer fragments of lives once lived. But the whole remains elusive. No one knows what flags they followed, if any. No one knows what songs they sang, or what they died to defend. And so, the Tollense Valley remains one of Europe's great archaeological puzzles, a battlefield without a war, a culture without a name, a silence too vast to ignore. As we leave the shadowed banks of the Tollense River and continue our search for ancient worlds lost to time, one question flows quietly beneath the surface. How many entire peoples, entire histories, have vanished without leaving a word behind, except the trace of a single, forgotten battle in the mud? As the desert winds sweep across the golden sands of northern Sudan, they uncover fragments of a forgotten world, rows of slender pyramids rising sharply against the horizon, their stones cracked and eroded by centuries of silence. This is Meroe, once the capital of a powerful kingdom that flourished along the banks of the Nile. Today, its royal tombs stand alone in the desert, surrounded by the ghosts of a civilization that ruled for nearly 1,000 years, and then vanished. The Kingdom of Meroe, also known as the Kingdom of Kush, was one of the great powers of ancient Africa. It emerged in the 8th century BC after the decline of Napata, its northern predecessor, and came to dominate a vast region stretching from the first cataract of the Nile down deep into what is now Sudan. For centuries, it rivaled the might of Egypt, not only borrowing from its traditions, but shaping them into something distinct, something unmistakably Meroitic. The people of Meroe built cities, palaces, and temples adorned with reliefs of lion-headed gods and warriors in elaborate headdresses. They developed a written script, the Meroitic alphabet, unlike any other in Africa. It was phonetic, elegant, and used for both religious and administrative purposes. But to this day, it remains largely undeciphered. And that, perhaps, is where the mystery begins. Who were the Meroites truly? What did they believe? What knowledge did they pass down in their script, now silent, unread, unspoken? Archaeological evidence paints a picture of a highly organized and culturally rich kingdom. Meroe was a center of metallurgy, especially known for its iron production. Fields of furnaces once glowed with heat, supplying tools, weapons, and trade goods throughout the Nile Valley. The kingdom maintained long-distance commerce with Egypt, the Mediterranean, and even parts of sub-Saharan Africa. Elephants, gold, incense, and ivory flowed through its cities, and its rulers, many of them queens or kandake, were not passive figureheads. They led armies, brokered treaties, and governed with authority that often surpassed their male counterparts. This matrilineal legacy, rare in the ancient world, set Meroe apart. And yet, by the 4th century AD, the kingdom had fallen. Its cities were abandoned, its language was forgotten, its monuments left to decay beneath the desert sun. What happened? Historians offer several theories. One suggests that environmental degradation played a central role. Centuries of intensive iron smelting may have led to widespread deforestation around Meroe, causing soil exhaustion and agricultural collapse. As the land dried and the population thinned, the kingdom's internal strength may have slowly crumbled. Others point to shifting trade routes. With the rise of Aksum in present-day Ethiopia and changes in Mediterranean commerce, Meroe may have been cut off from its economic lifelines. Wealth diminished, power waned, and rival forces moved in. In 350 AD, the Aksumite king Ezana claimed to have conquered Meroe. His inscriptions boast of victory, of razing cities and breaking fortresses. But no corresponding Meroitic records survive to tell the other side of the story. And that absence is telling. Unlike Egypt or Rome, Meroe left no expansive chronicle of its own greatness, no carved histories on temple walls, no great epics committed to papyrus. What it did leave, its script, its symbols, its tombs, speak in riddles. The Meroitic language, written in both hieroglyphic and cursive forms, has defied full translation. We can identify names, titles, and some recurring words, but the grammar, the meaning, the voice, is lost. Could it be that within these unbroken codes lies the explanation for the kingdom's disappearance? Was there famine, revolt, spiritual upheaval? Or did Meroe, facing inevitable decline, choose silence over spectacle, fading not in destruction, but in quiet resignation? Speculative theories have taken root in this silence. Some researchers wonder if Meroe was more than just a political kingdom, perhaps a religious or esoteric center as well. The alignment of its pyramids, the symbolism of its artwork, and the mystery of its language have led some to suggest that Meroe preserved traditions or knowledge older than even Egypt, guarded, secret, and now lost. Others look to the Kandake queens and the power they held. Was Meroe's social structure simply too different, too radical, for neighboring powers to understand or tolerate? Could its fall have been not just conquest, but erasure? Even today, large portions of Meroe remain unexcavated. Beneath the dunes, beneath the layered soil of its once bustling streets, lie the ruins of temples, homes, workshops, unseen, unknown. Perhaps even a library, its scrolls turned to dust, once held the keys to the Meroitic script. Perhaps there are still walls where names were written, names we've never heard, kings and queens whose deeds have yet to resurface. What we know is this. For centuries, Meroe was a center of culture, power, and belief, an African kingdom as advanced and as proud as any in the ancient world. And then, it disappeared. As we step away from the shadow of its slender pyramids and continue our journey through lost civilizations, one question remains buried in the desert sands. If a kingdom that forged iron, ruled queens, and wrote its own language could vanish so completely, what else might lie forgotten, just beneath the surface, waiting to be found? Amid the thick green of Guatemala's Petén jungle, where the trees rise in ancient silence and the canopy drips with the echo of birdsong, lie the ghostly outlines of something unexpected. Not towering temples like those of Tikal, not jungle-covered pyramids or lost causeways, but a grid, a precise, deliberate, geometric city plan etched into the earth. This is Nixtun-Ch'ich, a place unlike any other in the ancient Maya world, and a mystery that refuses to settle into known patterns. From above, the layout of Nixtun-Ch'ich is startling. Instead of the organic sprawl that characterizes most Maya cities, this settlement is organized along a strict east-west axis. Streets and avenues form a near-perfect grid, oriented with an almost obsessive regularity. Monumental architecture is clustered not at the city's heart, but toward the west, perhaps deliberately placed to align with celestial events, or to emphasize a spiritual center beyond mere geometry. This wasn't an accident. It was planned, controlled, designed. But who designed it, and why? Nixtun-Ch'ich dates to roughly 600 to 300 BC, during the Middle Pre-Classic period, long before the classical golden age of Maya civilization. At its height, it would have been a significant urban center, possibly housing thousands. Large platforms and ceremonial buildings suggest it was not just a town, but a place of power. Yet, unlike later Maya cities that celebrated individual rulers through elaborate inscriptions and towering stelae, Nixtun-Ch'ich is silent. There are no names, no known kings, no grand monuments proclaiming divine descent. And perhaps, most intriguingly, no later city ever replicated its design. Why? The Maya, known for their brilliant artistry, complex calendars, and celestial alignments, typically built their cities to reflect the natural landscape and the cosmos. Hills, caves, rivers. These were sacred elements, woven into the spiritual geography of urban life. Cities grew in response to ritual needs, not rigid planning. But Nixtun-Ch'ich breaks from this entirely. Its grid suggests control, uniformity, even surveillance. Was this an experiment in centralized governance? A society where rulers sought not just loyalty, but order? Did its people live by strict regulations, guided not only by spiritual beliefs, but by imposed design? And if so, why did it not endure? Mainstream theories suggest that Nixtun-Ch'ich may have represented a rare phase of early state formation, a short-lived attempt at consolidating power under a centralized authority. Perhaps it was a response to growing social complexity or a reaction to external threats. The rulers may have sought to impose unity through architecture, shaping behavior through space itself. But as later Maya cities rejected such rigidity, embracing spiritual and spatial fluidity, it's possible that this approach was deemed unnatural, or even oppressive. Was Nixtun-Ch'ich abandoned because it failed to inspire devotion? Because it lost touch with the sacred landscape? Or was its downfall more violent, more sudden? Archaeological layers suggest eventual decline, though no evidence of catastrophic destruction has yet been uncovered. Like so many ancient places, it seems to have faded rather than fallen, quietly losing influence, its plazas emptied, its avenues swallowed by jungle. And then there's the question of its uniqueness. Why do we find no other Maya city planned in this fashion? Why this single grid, at this single time, in this one place? Some have speculated that Nixtun-Ch'ich might reflect outside influence. Its layout resembles early cities in Mesopotamia or Egypt more than it does its Mesoamerican neighbors. Could long-forgotten contacts, cultural exchanges via trade or migration, have planted an architectural idea in this distant corner of the world? It's a tantalizing thought, though one not yet supported by solid evidence. Others wonder whether Nixtun-Ch'ich was the ceremonial or administrative capital of a theocratic order, one that required discipline, conformity, and a clearly structured environment. If so, its disappearance may signal the collapse of that order, or a rejection of its ideals. There are stranger theories still. The city's rigid symmetry and lack of later imitation have led some to propose that Nixtun-Ch'ich was never meant to be a city in the traditional sense, but rather a ceremonial blueprint, perhaps a physical manifestation of a cosmological map, or an earthly imitation of an otherworldly vision. If that were true, then what was the role of those who lived there? Were they residents or participants in a greater ritual? And what does it mean that such a vision was never replicated again? Today, Nixtun-Ch'ich lies half-buried, its symmetry visible only to those who know where and how to look. There are no grand museums dedicated to it, no throngs of visitors walking its grid. It remains one of the most curious and overlooked puzzles of the ancient Maya world. A city without successors, a plan without precedent, a silence without explanation. As we step away from the geometric shadows of Nixtun-Ch'ich, one final question follows like the rustle of wind through tall grass. Was this city the first glimpse of a world the Maya chose to leave behind, or the last remnant of a vision the world was not ready to embrace? Beneath the sun-scorched plains of Central Asia, where the desert brushes the edge of the mountains and the rivers run like veins through an unforgiving landscape, there once thrived a world now barely remembered. At first glance, the region seems desolate, empty. But hidden beneath layers of sand and silence lie the crumbling walls of cities that predate history as we know it. This was the heartland of the Bactria Margiana Archaeological Complex, known simply as BMAC, a civilization of palaces, temples, and mystery that rose in isolation and then quietly vanished. Discovered in the 1970s by Soviet archaeologist Viktor Saryanidi, the BMAC redefined what we thought we knew about the Bronze Age in Central Asia. Stretching across present-day Turkmenistan, northern Afghanistan, eastern Iran, and southern Uzbekistan, it flourished between 2300 and 1700 BC. At its core were sites like Gonur Tepe, Dashli, and Togalok, settlements fortified by thick mud brick walls, containing ceremonial platforms, elaborate tombs, and astonishing artifacts of gold, lapis lazuli, and carved stone. But what makes BMAC so extraordinary is not just the richness of its material culture, it's the isolation. These cities did not rise along the great rivers of Mesopotamia or the Nile. They were built in the middle of the desert, fed by canals that drew life from mountain streams, shaped by an intelligence that left no written trace. How did such a complex and advanced society emerge in this arid zone? And how did it fade so completely that it remained unknown until less than 50 years ago? The architecture of BMAC settlements tells us much. At Gonur Tepe, the central complex is built around a large ceremonial structure, interpreted by some as a temple or palace. Storage rooms, workshops, water reservoirs, and living quarters surround it in a meticulously organized layout. Fire altars, strange stone vessels, and burial goods suggest a highly ritualized culture. And the objects found here, ornaments of shell from the Indus Valley, cylinder seals with Mesopotamian motifs, and mirrors of polished metal, indicate a network of trade and influence stretching far beyond the sands. But while the connections are clear, the identity is not. BMAC people did not leave texts. Their language, religion, and social structure remain subjects of speculation. Some scholars believe they spoke an early form of Indo-Iranian. Others argue they were a unique cultural group, later absorbed or displaced by incoming migrants from the steppes. We have no names for their cities, no records of their rulers, only broken walls and silent graves. And yet, something powerful thrived here. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of long-distance trade, BMAC goods found as far as the Indus Valley, Elam, and Mesopotamia. This was not a closed culture. It was open, active, connected. Some have even proposed that BMAC was the missing link between the great civilizations of the Near East and the emerging cultures of South Asia. But if that's true, what went wrong? One mainstream explanation suggests environmental decline. The rivers feeding the elaborate canal systems may have shifted or dried up. Without water, agriculture would have collapsed, trade would have dwindled, populations would have scattered. A civilization built on the delicate balance of hydrology may have simply withered when the land changed. Yet, unlike other ancient cities, BMAC sites show no clear signs of invasion or destruction. No burning, no evidence of war. The decline appears gradual, almost deliberate. Could it be that BMAC society underwent internal transformation? That its people, over generations, moved into smaller, more mobile groups, abandoning the urban model altogether? Or did they merge with incoming populations from the northern steppes, cultures with different ways of life, different gods, and different needs? There are theories, some more controversial, that suggest BMAC's elite may have been a priestly caste, conducting rituals that influenced later Zoroastrian or Vedic traditions. The fire altars, sacred enclosures, and emphasis on purity seem to echo belief systems that would emerge long after BMAC disappeared. Could this culture have passed on its knowledge not through monuments, but through oral traditions absorbed by others? Still, more speculative voices have raised deeper questions. Why does BMAC appear so suddenly, so fully formed? Was it truly a local development, or did it represent a transplanted tradition brought by forgotten seafarers or desert-crossing migrants whose homelands are lost to time? And why do so many of their artifacts bear traces of other civilizations, yet retain a distinct and unmistakable style? Perhaps most haunting of all is the emptiness they left behind. When BMAC collapsed, it left no successor state, no cultural heir to carry its story forward. Its cities fell silent, its roads vanished, and its language, whatever it was, died with its last speakers. Today, the wind moves through the ruins of Gonur Tepe and Dashli, brushing over the sun-baked bricks and half-buried walls. The altars are cold, the canals are dry, and yet something lingers. A presence, a question, a world just out of reach. As we leave the forgotten temples of Central Asia and move deeper into the ancient unknown, one question follows us like a shadow across the steppe. How many worlds like BMAC once flourished in silence, only to be buried by the very sands they once turned to life? In the windswept hills of Sardinia, where olive trees twist in ancient silence and rocky outcrops rise like sleeping giants, stone towers pierce the landscape, timeless, brooding, and utterly enigmatic. These are the Nuragi, great conical fortresses of rough-hewn stone, some standing over 20 meters high, built without mortar and still defying the centuries. They are the most visible remnants of the Nuragic Civilization, a culture that flourished on this Mediterranean island for over a millennium, and then, as if swallowed by the sea breeze, vanished. The Nuragic Civilization is one of Europe's oldest and most mysterious prehistoric cultures. Emerging around 1800 BC during the Bronze Age and continuing until roughly 500 BC, it left behind no written records, no known language, no epic inscriptions. And yet, what they did leave behind is striking. More than 7,000 Nuragi dotting the Sardinian landscape, massive towers often surrounded by villages, sanctuaries, megalithic temples, and tombs carved into stone. These structures were not isolated. Many Nuragi were carefully positioned across sightlines, forming a network, possibly of communication, defense, or ritual. Some are single towers, others form complexes with multiple levels, spiral staircases, courtyards, and wells dug deep into the rock. They hint at a society of extraordinary organizational skill, architectural prowess, and enduring mystery. But who were the Nuragic people? Archaeological finds, bronze statuettes, decorated ceramics, weapons, and jewelry suggest a hierarchical society led by chieftains or priest kings, deeply connected to ritual and warfare. Their bronze figurines depict warriors, archers, and divine beings, each rendered with symbolic precision. Stone circles and sacred wells speak to a spiritual life closely linked to the cycles of nature and celestial observation. And yet, for all this richness, their origins remain uncertain. Did the Nuragic culture evolve from earlier Sardinian Neolithic peoples? Or were they part of a broader wave of seafaring Bronze Age cultures spreading across the Mediterranean? Their architecture has no clear parallel. Their customs, while sharing hints of Mycenaean or Cycladic influence, are distinct and intensely local. What's perhaps most perplexing is how long they endured, over 1,000 years, yet left so little trace beyond stone and metal. And then, around the end of the first millennium BC, the Nuragic world fades. Their towers are no longer maintained, their settlements shrink, and soon their culture disappears from the historical record. Why? Mainstream theories suggest a gradual decline due to shifting power dynamics in the Mediterranean. By the 9th and 8th centuries BC, Sardinia was increasingly drawn into the expanding orbits of Phoenician, Carthaginian, and later Roman influence. Trade networks shifted. New political systems took root. The Nuragic people may have been absorbed, their distinct culture diluted until only stone remained. But this theory leaves gaps. Why did the Nuragic elite vanish so completely? Why were the towers abandoned, not repurposed or rebuilt? Why do we find no transitional phase, no evidence of adaptation, only disappearance? Some researchers propose internal causes: resource depletion, drought, or conflict. Sardinia's rugged terrain may have made agriculture difficult to sustain at large scales. Political fragmentation or civil unrest could have weakened the cohesion of Nuragic society over time. Perhaps the towers, once symbols of unity and power, became relics of a disordered past. And yet, there are more speculative suggestions too. Some believe the Nuragic people may have retreated from coastal areas as foreign powers arrived, not out of defeat, but in resistance, preserving their way of life in the island's interior. Others point to the extraordinary craftsmanship of their bronze figurines and temple complexes, suggesting an elite priesthood that may have dissolved its institutions deliberately, perhaps in response to changing cosmological beliefs or external pressures. More fringe theories draw attention to the sheer uniqueness of the Nuragi themselves. Why were they built with such scale and effort, in such numbers? Were they only fortresses? Or did they serve astronomical purposes, markers of solstices, equinoxes, or star alignments? Some structures, like the Nurage Losa and Su Nuraxi, appear to have orientations that match celestial events. If so, was this a civilization governed not only by the rhythm of seasons, but by the movement of stars? And could changes in that cosmic order, real or perceived, have played a role in their decline? Even today, the Nuragic people remain strangely absent from the mythologies of the cultures that followed. The Romans encountered their ruins, but said little of the builders. Sardinian folklore speaks vaguely of giganti, giants who once roamed the island, raising towers and moving stones. Were these stories echoes of a cultural memory too distant to name? The Nuragic civilization left no words behind, no chronicles of conquest or decline, only stone towers, bronze warriors, and the haunting silence of a people whose world was built to last, and yet, somehow, did not. As we move beyond the stone sentinels of Sardinia and continue our journey through the ruins of civilizations forgotten, one question rises like a whisper through the island winds. What kind of world builds monuments meant to endure for eternity, and then walks away without a trace? High in the misty foothills of Costa Rica's Central Highlands, where dense cloud forests breathe in silence and vines curl over moss-covered stone, lies a place few have heard of, yet many have walked past unknowingly. Guayabo, a name whispered through the trees, etched into volcanic rock and buried beneath centuries of soil. Here, among towering sheba trees and tangled roots, stand the forgotten foundations of a lost city. Round stone platforms, ceremonial causeways, and aqueducts still channeling water, all remnants of a culture that once thrived, and then disappeared without a trace. Guayabo is the largest and most important pre-Columbian archaeological site in Costa Rica, yet it remains shrouded in obscurity. Located on the forested slopes of the Turrialba volcano, the site covers more than 200 hectares, though only a small fraction has been excavated. What has been revealed, however, is remarkable. Stone-paved roads cut through the forest. Drainage systems and aqueducts, still functioning in the rainy season, demonstrate an advanced understanding of engineering and hydraulic design. Massive circular platforms made of river stones once held wooden structures, likely homes, temples, or communal buildings, and intricately carved petroglyphs, spirals, animals, and abstract symbols still peek from beneath the moss, as if trying to speak across time. But who built this city, and why did they leave? Carbon dating suggests that Guayabo was inhabited from around 1000 BC and reached its peak between 600 and 900 AD. It may have supported a few thousand people, a complex society engaged in agriculture, trade, and religious practice. Its strategic location offered fertile soil, access to fresh water, and a view across vast stretches of land. From here, leaders could control movement and communication across central Costa Rica. And yet, by 1400 AD, it was abandoned. Long before the arrival of the Spanish, long before anyone could write down its name, its rulers, its gods. Mainstream explanations propose a quiet decline, perhaps driven by environmental shifts, soil exhaustion, or internal social conflict. Some believe the community may have simply relocated, dispersing into smaller, more sustainable settlements deeper in the jungle or along the coast. But the absence of destruction is telling. There is no evidence of warfare or invasion, no burned structures, no mass graves. The city seems to have been left with intention, ritualistically, perhaps, slowly, as if the people knew it was time to go. Why? One possibility is volcanic activity. Guayabo lies in the shadow of Turrialba, a volcano known for its occasional violent eruptions. Did the people interpret rumblings in the earth as warnings? Did they read the signs in nature and decide that the land had turned sacred or dangerous? Others point to the enigmatic nature of the site itself. The petroglyphs carved into stone feature animals like jaguars and crocodiles, spirals that may represent water or cosmological beliefs, and symbols that remain undeciphered. Was Guayabo more than just a city? Could it have been a ceremonial center, abandoned once its spiritual purpose had been fulfilled? More speculative theories draw connections to wider networks of pre-Columbian cultures. Some archaeologists believe Guayabo may have been part of a larger cultural sphere stretching into northern South America and across Central America, an unrecorded mosaic of shared beliefs and trade. Could the city's decline be linked to a broader regional shift, one not yet fully understood? Then there is the question of its architecture. The raised stone mounds, perfectly circular and built with precision, are unlike anything else in Mesoamerica. Their design may have mirrored cosmological concepts, circles representing the cyclical nature of time, or the sun, or the eternal flow between life and death. The roads, some of which connect to places far beyond the site itself, suggest not isolation, but integration. Links to peoples and places whose stories remain untold. And yet, no inscriptions have been found. No names, no kings, no gods, It is this silence that makes Guayabo so haunting. A city built with such care, with such mastery of stone and water, left behind no voice to speak for it, only the murmur of wind through leaves, the drip of water through aqueducts that still work, and the occasional call of a bird echoing through the canopy. Was this a society that valued oral tradition over the written word, one that passed knowledge and stories through generations, until migration or disaster severed the chain? Or is Guayabo one of many centers from a culture that history never recorded, because it was never conquered, never chronicled, and never given the chance to endure beyond its forested walls? Today, the jungle reclaims what was once the heart of a people. Vines twist around ancient roads, platforms sink slowly into the soil. Yet the site endures, a sacred space to some, an open question to others. As we leave the moss-covered stones and spiraling symbols of Guayabo behind and continue our journey through the civilizations the world forgot, one question lingers beneath the canopy. If an entire city can vanish beneath the trees, its name, its people, its purpose lost, how many more are still out there, waiting to be found? In the vast emptiness of Yemen's desert, where shifting sands bury stories and time moves slowly under a relentless sun, the remains of stone walls and broken pillars still rise from the dust. The landscape is dry and silent now. But long ago, this was the center of a flourishing civilization, an oasis of wealth, ingenuity, and power. This was Marib, the ancient capital of the Kingdom of Saba. And somewhere amid its forgotten ruins lies one of history's great unanswered questions. How could a city so rich, so well engineered, and so central to ancient trade simply disappear? Marib was not a myth. It was real and remarkable. Mentioned in ancient inscriptions and biblical texts, the city was the heart of the Sabaean kingdom, which flourished in South Arabia from around 1000 BC to the 1st centuries AD. The Sabaeans built a sophisticated and enduring society, one rooted in trade, agriculture, and monumental architecture. At the center of it all stood the Great Marib Dam, an engineering marvel of the ancient world. This dam was no small feat. Stretching nearly 600 meters between two rocky hills, the structure captured and channeled seasonal rains from nearby highlands into an intricate network of irrigation canals. These waters turned the surrounding land, now a barren plain, into fertile fields. Wheat, barley, date palms, and frankincense flourished, and so did the city. Marib became a vital stop along the incense route, a trade network that connected the Arabian Peninsula with Egypt, the Levant, Mesopotamia, and beyond. Caravans passed through, loaded with spices, myrrh, gold, and silk. Inscriptions left behind in Sabaean script speak of kings, temples, alliances, and rituals. It was a land of both commerce and devotion. But despite its wealth and stability, the civilization that built Marib slowly faded, and the reasons why remain uncertain. Traditional accounts and some ancient legends suggest a natural disaster. According to certain Islamic texts and local oral traditions, the failure of the Great Marib Dam marked the end of the city's prosperity. A flood, sudden and devastating, swept through the land, destroying agriculture and scattering the population. The dam, repaired multiple times across centuries, may have finally collapsed in the 6th century AD. Yet the archaeological evidence tells a more complex story. While the dam did suffer damage, it seems to have been maintained and functional for generations. Some scholars believe the decline was more gradual, perhaps due to silt buildup, changes in rainfall, or the slow weakening of political authority. Without central coordination, even a minor break in the system could have led to widespread agricultural failure. Crops would have withered, trade would have slowed, and people may have left, not in panic, but in search of stability elsewhere. Still, others suggest that external pressures may have played a role. By the first few centuries AD, Marib's importance as a trade hub had begun to fade. New maritime routes bypassed the overland incense roads. Powerful neighbors, including the Himyarites and eventually the Aksumite Empire from across the Red Sea, began to exert control over the region. As political alliances shifted, Marib's influence waned. But what makes the story of Marib even more mysterious is what's missing. No great chronicles, no dramatic inscriptions marking the city's end, no evidence of widespread war or destruction. The temples fell silent, the water stopped flowing, and the sands slowly covered what remained. Was Marib abandoned by a slow unraveling of trade, infrastructure, and leadership? Or was there something deeper, something more enigmatic, that led to its quiet disappearance? Some more speculative voices have wondered whether Marib's spiritual role played a part in its downfall. The Sabaeans worshipped deities like Almaka, the moon god, and built large sanctuaries in his honor. Their culture revolved around a careful balance between religious observance and political power. Could the decline of belief systems, or a shift in religious identity, perhaps through early contact with Christianity or Islam, have weakened the unifying force of the kingdom? Others draw attention to the uncanny precision of their astronomical alignments, the symbolism of their temples, and the enduring silence that surrounds their fall. Were they watching the stars for guidance? Did they interpret signs, celestial or otherwise, as a reason to leave? These are questions for which we have few answers, only fragments of evidence scattered through the dust. And then, of course, there is the Great Dam itself. Even in ruins, it is imposing. Massive stone blocks, carefully fitted together without mortar, still hold the memory of water. The remnants of sluice gates and distribution channels speak of a time when knowledge, not merely survival, shaped the land. Was the dam a source of life or of hubris? Did its final collapse serve as a metaphor, or perhaps a warning, that even the greatest achievements can fall to time and neglect? Today, modern Marib stands not far from the ancient site, but the ruins remain largely unexplored. Political instability and harsh terrain have kept much of the city's buried history hidden. Yet those who have walked its ruined streets speak of a haunting stillness, as if something of the old world still lingers in the stones. As we leave behind the crumbled walls and dry canals of Marib and journey onward to other lost civilizations, one question rises from the silence. If an empire of water and stone could vanish into the desert, its memory surviving only in fragments, how much more have we yet to lose before we remember to look back? Deep within the tangled forests of Kenya's coast, where giant baobabs stretch their gnarled limbs into the sky and the air hangs heavy with the scent of salt and soil, lie the quiet remnants of a once thriving city. Crumbling coral walls emerge from dense green undergrowth. Arched doorways open into empty courtyards. A tall stone pillar watches over it all, weathered by centuries of sun and silence. This is Gedi, an ancient Swahili city lost to time, a place of stone and shadow, whose origins are uncertain, and whose disappearance still whispers across the coastal breeze. The Gedi Ruins, also spelled Gedi, rest just a few kilometers inland from the Indian Ocean, near the Kenyan town of Malindi. Today, it feels remote, isolated, almost forgotten. But centuries ago, it was a sophisticated urban center, active between the 12th and 17th centuries AD. Built primarily from coral stone harvested from the nearby sea, its structures reveal a people skilled in architecture, trade, and daily ritual. The city had well-planned streets, residential compounds, palaces, a grand mosque, and even indoor plumbing. Some houses had bathrooms and drainage systems, centuries ahead of what many parts of the world would adopt. And then, quite suddenly, it was gone. What makes Gedi so compelling is not just its preservation, but its paradox. This was no small, primitive village. It was a city that flourished with urban elegance. Chinese porcelain, Persian glass, and Indian beads have all been found here, evidence of a trading network that spanned continents. Gedi was part of the broader Swahili coast culture, a maritime civilization that linked Africa's eastern shores to the Middle East, India, and beyond. But Gedi is different. It stands inland, surrounded by forest, not easily visible from the sea. Was it a retreat, a stronghold, or simply a thriving inland market town, part of a web of Swahili city-states from Mogadishu to Kilwa? And then, the central question: why did its people leave? Archaeologists and historians have long puzzled over Gedi's abandonment. There is no record of war or fire, no signs of plague or natural disaster. Its buildings were not violently destroyed, but rather left in place, untouched yet uninhabited. The great mosque remained intact. The tombs were not defaced. The city appears to have been abandoned with care, or perhaps reverence. One explanation points to shifting trade routes. As maritime patterns evolved in the Indian Ocean, and as Portuguese ships began dominating the sea lanes in the 16th century, inland cities like Gedi may have lost their strategic and commercial value. Traders moved elsewhere, wealth followed, and slowly the city's purpose withered. Others cite the possibility of environmental change. The region's groundwater, once carefully managed through ancient wells, may have been depleted. A changing climate or salinization of freshwater could have made daily life difficult. Without reliable water, the population may have been forced to migrate. But even these theories leave something unsatisfying. Why the complete silence? Why did no oral histories preserve Gedi's story in local traditions? Why did later generations seem to forget it altogether? Some speculate that spiritual factors played a role. The Swahili coast, deeply influenced by Islam since at least the 10th century AD, also maintained older, pre-Islamic beliefs. Perhaps Gedi became associated with a curse or a sacred event. There are local legends that speak of spirits, jinn, guarding the city. According to some oral tales, those who entered uninvited would fall ill or lose their way. Even today, many approach the ruins with respect, and sometimes hesitation. There's also the architectural mystery. Why were such finely crafted buildings, equipped with amenities and ornamentation, not replicated elsewhere inland? Why is Gedi so advanced, yet so alone? Some of its coral walls bear detailed carvings. Certain doorways have precision stonework that suggests a level of craftsmanship unusual for the region at the time. Did Gedi benefit from visiting artisans? Was it a royal enclave, or perhaps a religious retreat hidden from the coast for protection? There are also the burials. Tombs near the Great Mosque include stone pillars and recessed niches, built with striking care. But no inscriptions remain, no names, no dates, just the structures, mute and eternal. Who was laid to rest here? Priests, rulers, merchants? And what of the objects left behind? Imported ceramics, delicate jewelry, coins, and ritual vessels. They suggest not desperation, but prosperity. A city alive with trade, ideas, and wealth. Until, suddenly, it wasn't. Some fringe theories propose more distant causes: disease brought by foreign ships, sudden droughts, or a regional collapse of Swahili urbanism. Others hint at cultural transformation. Perhaps Gedi's population merged with coastal groups, assimilated into growing port towns, or simply chose to leave, seeking safety or opportunity elsewhere. Today, Gedi rests beneath a canopy of trees, watched over by monkeys and the rustle of wind. The coral stones remain cool in the shade. The silence is deep, but it doesn't feel empty. It feels suspended, like a question waiting to be answered. As we step through the ancient archways of Gedi and continue our journey across the vanishing footprints of human civilization, one final thought lingers beneath the forest canopy. How many cities, like Gedi, once pulsed with life, trade, and culture, only to be swallowed by silence and leaves, leaving behind only the sound of birds and the riddle of absence. High in the cloud forests of northern Peru, where the green mist rolls through mountains like breath over forgotten stone, and moss hangs from the trees like ancient veils, stand the remnants of a vanished people. Towering stone walls loom above steep cliffs. Circular buildings lie scattered across lush ridgelines, and carved into vertical rock faces are the silent, hollow-eyed tombs of those long gone. This was the realm of the Chachapoya, the so-called warriors of the clouds, a mysterious civilization that flourished in the Andean highlands and then, like the mist itself, disappeared. The Chachapoya were not an empire in the traditional sense. They were a network of highland societies that occupied a rugged, rain-soaked region between the Andes and the Amazon basin. The terrain here is formidable. Jagged cliffs, narrow plateaus, and dense forests that still resist exploration today. Yet, amid these harsh conditions, the Chachapoya constructed cities of stone, monumental in scale and striking in their isolation. Perhaps the most famous is Cuelap. Perched at nearly 3,000 meters above sea level, Cuelap is a massive fortress-like complex enclosed by walls up to 20 meters high. Inside are more than 400 circular structures, many once topped with conical roofs and adorned with geometric friezes of limestone. To climb its steep stone ramps, to stand within its misty confines, is to feel the presence of a people who knew how to command their world without conquering it through spectacle. And yet, for all its grandeur, Cuelap and the broader Chachapoya legacy remained unknown to much of the outside world until relatively recently. The Chachapoya culture reached its height between 800 and 1470 AD. Though not an empire like the Incas to the south, they were formidable, resilient, highly organized, and fiercely territorial. Spanish chroniclers later described them as tall, fair-skinned, and independent-minded. Their homes and temples were often built in places few others dared settle, along cliff edges, deep within gorges, and high in fog-drenched ridges. Their burial practices were equally daring. Mummified corpses placed upright in sarcophagi on sheer cliff faces, unreachable without ropes or ladders. But by the late 15th century, the Chachapoya were no longer independent. The Inca Empire, expanding rapidly, launched a military campaign into the region. Despite stiff resistance, the Chachapoya were conquered and absorbed into the Incan state. Their leaders were displaced, their people resettled across distant corners of the empire, and their cities, like Cuelap, gradually emptied. Was this the beginning of their disappearance? Possibly. The Incas, while efficient administrators, often dismantled the power structures of those they conquered. Chachapoya elites were removed, religious centers were reoriented or abandoned, and traditional ways of life were interrupted. Over time, the distinctive identity of the Chachapoya may have faded into the larger imperial fabric, no longer erased, but slowly diluted. Then came the Spanish. The arrival of Europeans in the early 16th century brought collapse to the Incan Empire and chaos to the lands it ruled. The Chachapoya, like many groups, rebelled against Inca rule and in some cases aided the Spanish in their conquest. But if they hoped to regain autonomy, it was short-lived. With the Spaniards came disease, exploitation, and further dislocation. By the 17th century, the Chachapoya had all but vanished from historical records. But was it only conquest and disease that ended their civilization? Some scholars think not. The remoteness of their territory, the enduring strength of their structures, and the lack of written records suggest a people who may have also withdrawn, deliberately or spiritually, from the changing world around them. Could they have retreated deeper into the cloud forest, merged into smaller, hidden communities, or preserved parts of their culture that still survive, unnamed, in the folkways of the Andean highlands? Archaeological discoveries continue to challenge assumptions. New tombs are still being found, filled with textiles, pottery, and intricate funerary masks. Petroglyphs in caves depict spirals, animals, and possibly maps or mythologies we cannot yet read. And the skeletal remains of Chachapoya mummies, often remarkably well preserved, suggest ritual practices that hint at complex beliefs about death, transformation, and eternity. Their cities were built without wheels, their temples without mortar. Their architecture defies weather and time. How did they manage to quarry and transport massive stones across vertical terrain? How did they survive and thrive among the peaks, where others built little? And why did they favor such remote and inaccessible places? Were they fleeing something or protecting something? Some have suggested that Quelap and other sites were not just centers of power, but sanctuaries. Built as spiritual refuges, aligned with stars or sacred landscapes, designed not for conquest, but communion. If so, then their disappearance may not have been a simple matter of defeat, but of transformation. A culture that did not collapse, but dissolved into its environment. Even today, much of the Chachapoya territory remains unexcavated. Dense jungle hides ruins still unnamed. Oral traditions speak of ancient roads, stone cities hidden beneath vines, and caves sealed against time. Local legends whisper that the Gentiles, the ancient ones, still watch from the cliffs. As we leave the mist-shrouded walls of Quelap and the vertigo-inducing tombs of the cloud forest behind, one final question echoes in the stillness. What if the Chachapoya never truly vanished, but simply learned how to disappear? High on the mesas of southwestern Colorado, where sandstone cliffs loom over arid canyons and the silence feels ancient and alert, dwell the ghostly remains of one of North America's most captivating lost worlds. Nestled into the rock face, beneath the overhangs of sheer cliffs, are the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde. Rows of windows cut into stone, towers rising from alcoves, and ceremonial kivas sunken into the earth like hidden hearts. These are the homes of the ancestral Puebloans, a people who carved civilization into stone, and then walked away. The cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde were not the beginning of the story. For centuries before, from around 600 AD, the ancestral Puebloans lived atop the mesas in pit houses and above-ground pueblos, circular kivas, straight-walled rooms, and structures aligned with the movements of the sun. Over time, their architecture grew more sophisticated. Towers rose, reservoirs were built, trade routes stretched hundreds of miles in every direction. Then, around the late 1100s AD, something changed. Families began building into the cliffs themselves, excavating and shaping entire villages under natural rock shelters. Some of these settlements, like Cliff Palace and Spruce Tree House, contained over 100 rooms, reached by ladders and handholds carved into vertical stone. Protected from the elements, these cliff dwellings stand in remarkable condition even today, haunting in their precision and scale. But by the late 1200s, just a century later, they were empty. No one knows exactly why. More than 20,000 people once lived in the Mesa Verde region, and yet, by 1300 AD, the dwellings had been abandoned. Fires were extinguished, ladders removed. The vibrant culture that had flourished in the canyons disappeared, quietly and completely. What caused this exodus? Archaeologists point to several converging factors. A prolonged drought in the late 13th century may have made farming, already difficult in such a dry, rugged landscape, unsustainable. Depleted soil and limited water sources may have driven families to seek more fertile ground. There is also evidence of growing conflict. Defensive architecture, signs of hastily abandoned rooms, and the construction of cliff dwellings themselves, sheltered, hidden, difficult to reach, suggest a community increasingly concerned with security. Were they under threat from neighboring groups, or from within? Some believe internal tensions over resources, leadership, or spiritual interpretation may have created fractures within the society. Others propose that the departure was a coordinated migration, not a collapse. A journey guided not by fear, but by ceremony and vision. Still, the mystery remains. Why leave such well-built homes behind? Why take the time to seal kivas, to clean rooms, to extinguish sacred fires with reverence, if this was a hasty escape? And why is there so little evidence of where the people went? We do know that the ancestral Puebloans did not vanish. Their descendants live on today among the modern Hopi, Zuni, and other Pueblo peoples of the Southwest. Oral traditions speak of migrations, guided by spiritual signs, sacred directions, and obligations to the land. These stories tell of a people who did not fall, but moved forward. Yet for all these insights, the silence of Mesa Verde is profound. There are no inscriptions left behind, no written records, no final message carved into stone, only empty rooms, soot-blackened ceilings, and the quiet precision of a vanished world. Some theorists have looked deeper into the celestial alignments of the architecture. Many kivas are precisely oriented with solstices and equinoxes. Certain towers may have served as astronomical observatories. Was their calendar disrupted by changing skies? Did a cosmic event alter their interpretation of sacred time? Others have noted the intense ceremonial focus of the society. The kiva, central to community and ritual, was a space for communion with ancestral spirits and subterranean forces. Could it be that a shift in spiritual belief, or the fulfillment of a prophecy, triggered the Great Migration? More speculative ideas hint at psychological and cultural thresholds, a moment when the landscape no longer felt safe, or sacred, or balanced. When drought, hunger, and spiritual uncertainty combined to create a collective decision to leave everything behind and begin again. Still, no single theory answers it all. The cliff dwellings remain, preserved in time, as if waiting for their builders to return. Tools still lie near hearths. Corn cobs are buried in storage rooms. Petroglyphs of spirals, animals, and human forms adorn canyon walls, symbols whose full meanings have faded into dust. Today, as the sun sets over the mesas and golden light spills across sandstone walls, the ruins cast long shadows across centuries of questions. Wind moves through the empty doorways, ravens circle overhead, and deep in the canyons, where once voices echoed with ceremony and song, silence reigns. As we continue our exploration of civilizations that disappeared into the folds of history, one final question lingers in the dry desert air. What does it mean to leave not in defeat, but in decision? And what knowledge might have guided the people of Mesa Verde as they turned their backs on stone and walked into the unknown? Beneath the red soils and rolling savannas of central Nigeria, where the Harmattan wind sweeps dry across open plains, a buried legacy waited in silence for centuries. It began with a fragment, a face of terracotta unearthed by chance, a solemn expression, hollow eyes, an elongated head framed by intricate braids. It was like nothing else in sub-Saharan Africa, and it marked the rediscovery of one of the continent's most mysterious lost cultures. This was Nok, an ancient civilization of astonishing artistry and unknown origin. The Nok culture takes its name from a small village where the first artifacts were found in the 1920s. But the story truly began to take shape in the 1940s, when workers at a tin mine stumbled upon a wealth of terracotta sculptures buried deep in the ground. Human figures, some naturalistic, others abstract, emerged from the earth. Some stood with hands folded, others sat with exaggerated postures or stared outward with piercing, stylized features. They were beautiful, sophisticated, and old. Radiocarbon dating placed the earliest Nok artifacts at around 1500 BC. The culture would last nearly 2 millennia before vanishing around 300 AD. Yet for such a long-lived and clearly advanced society, the Nok left behind no known written language, no palaces or temples, no tombs or stelae carved with kings or gods. Only these remarkable sculptures, and more questions than answers. Who were the Nok people? How did they develop such artistic skill in isolation? And why did their civilization fade into obscurity, forgotten for over 1,000 years? Beyond their terracotta figures, the Nok are believed to have been among the earliest sub-Saharan cultures to smelt iron. Iron tools and furnaces have been discovered near their settlements, indicating technological innovation at a time when much of the region was still Neolithic. Their agriculture, too, was organized. Evidence of yam, millet, and cowpea cultivation suggests stable food-producing communities that likely traded with neighboring peoples. But no large cities have been found, no administrative centers. It's as if the Nok were a dispersed but culturally unified network, tied together not by empire, but by belief, custom, and artistry. And when they disappeared, they left no known successor to carry their legacy forward. Mainstream theories suggest environmental change may have played a role. A shift in climate could have disrupted agriculture, depleted resources, or forced communities to abandon their settlements. Some archaeologists point to gradual migration. Nok populations may have been absorbed into rising cultures of West Africa, carrying fragments of their knowledge with them, eventually indistinguishable from others. Still, the timeline remains unclear. There are no signs of conquest, no mass burials, no cataclysm. The sculptures simply stop appearing. The furnaces go cold. The fields fall silent. And it is here that the mystery deepens. Why would a culture capable of such expressive and technically challenging terracotta work, some pieces up to a meter tall, leave behind so little else? Why no inscriptions, no great monuments, no burial complexes to match their spiritual depth? Some scholars propose that the sculptures themselves may have been religious or ceremonial objects, used in ancestor worship, fertility rites, or spiritual initiation. Their stylized features, exaggerated proportions, and deliberate postures suggest symbolic meaning. Were they meant to embody deities, spirits, or to guard the dead? A few statues feature individuals wearing what appear to be regalia, headdresses, bracelets, or ceremonial garb. Others depict figures bound or restrained, prompting speculation about judicial rituals, punishment, or offerings. And yet, without texts, we can only guess. More speculative theories suggest the Nok were a center of a much wider and older tradition, one that extended far beyond the borders of modern Nigeria. Similarities in style and technique have been noted between Nok terracottas and later art from the Yoruba and Benin cultures. Is it possible that Nok formed the cultural bedrock of West Africa's future kingdoms? That their ideas endured, but their name was lost? And then, there are those who ask even broader questions. How did such a sophisticated artistic tradition arise so early in such relative isolation? Were the Nok in contact with trans-Saharan trade networks long before such exchanges were believed to exist? Could their influence have reached further than we currently understand? The problem is access. Many of the original Nok finds were removed from their context by miners and looters, leaving archaeologists without crucial layers of evidence. Entire settlements may remain buried and undiscovered beneath the fields and hills. And without large-scale, long-term excavation, the Nok story remains a partially told tale, half whispered, half imagined. Today, their sculptures reside in museums and private collections around the world. Their haunting expressions still captivate those who gaze into their hollow eyes. Yet the people behind them, what they believed, how they lived, why they vanished, remain elusive. The soil of central Nigeria still holds their secrets. Scattered shards lie beneath the roots of baobab trees. Ancient furnaces rust in the dust. And perhaps somewhere, deep in the earth, still lies a structure, a stone, a clue that will bring their story closer to the surface. As we leave behind the haunting faces of Nok and continue our journey through the echoes of forgotten worlds, one quiet question remains. When a civilization disappears, but its art remains, what does that art still know, that we have yet to remember? In the arid coastal valleys of southern Peru and northern Chile, where the Atacama Desert meets the sea and the land breathes only in silence, traces of a vanished civilization still lie buried beneath the sand. Among dry riverbeds and windswept dunes, fragments of woven textiles, llama bones, and sun-bleached ceramic jars offer a whisper of life that once thrived in this unforgiving place. This was the world of the Chiribaya, an ancient culture that carved order and abundance from one of the driest landscapes on Earth, and then quietly disappeared. The Chiribaya culture emerged around 900 AD and endured for roughly 5 centuries. They occupied the river valleys stretching from southern Peru into northern Chile, thin ribbons of fertility bordered by desert and ocean. These people were not warriors or empire builders, but agriculturists, herders, and master weavers. Their settlements were small, organized, and enduring. They built terraced farms, developed sophisticated irrigation systems, and raised camelids like llamas and alpacas, essential not just for transport, but for meat, wool, and ritual. Perhaps most striking are their textiles. In graves preserved by the dry desert climate, Chiribaya clothing has survived with astonishing color and intricacy. Tunics and belts woven in geometric patterns, dyed in hues that still radiate after 1,000 years. These garments speak not only to artistic excellence, but to cultural identity, social status, and spiritual expression. And yet, for all the subtlety and resilience of their world, the Chiribaya were gone by the 15th century. What happened? Archaeological evidence suggests a slow decline. Unlike the violent conquests that marked the fall of other civilizations, there is no sign that the Chiribaya were destroyed in a single event. Their settlements were not burned. Their cemeteries were not desecrated. Instead, they seem to have simply stopped building, stopped weaving, stopped appearing. One prevailing theory is that the Chiribaya were absorbed by the expanding Inca Empire. By the mid-1400s, the Inca had reached far into southern Peru and northern Chile, integrating regional cultures into their administrative and spiritual systems. Local leaders may have been co-opted, villages reorganized, identities gradually transformed under a new imperial structure. The Chiribaya, in this view, didn't vanish. They dissolved into something larger. But even this explanation leaves gaps. Why did they leave behind so little of their voice in the Inca record? If their people were absorbed, why did so few Chiribaya customs, names, or gods survive in oral traditions? Some researchers propose that environmental pressures may have played a role. The region is intensely vulnerable to shifts in rainfall and river flow. A prolonged drought, or the opposite, a destructive El Niño event, could have devastated agriculture, disrupted water sources, and forced communities to relocate. Coastal erosion, siltation of irrigation canals, or even disease among llama herds might have crippled the foundations of their economy. Others point to social dynamics. As trade patterns changed and political landscapes shifted, the once thriving Chiribaya valleys may have lost their centrality. With no large military force, no urban strongholds, and no written system to preserve their memory, their culture may have simply faded, quietly, invisibly, like a tide pulling away from the shore. And yet, hints of something more complex remain. In their cemeteries, Chiribaya burials are remarkably consistent and carefully arranged. Bodies were placed in a seated, flexed position, often wrapped in layers of textiles, with offerings of pottery, tools, food, and even small animals. These burials suggest deep respect for the dead and a belief in continuity between the living and the afterlife. Some graves include miniature models, tiny llamas, farming tools, even houses, perhaps tokens for the next world, or symbolic representations of a life well lived. But what strikes archaeologists most is the order, the uniformity, the silence. There is no evidence of sudden panic, mass flight, or cultural rupture. The people did not abandon their traditions in haste. They completed their rituals, they buried their dead, and then they stopped. Was it a deliberate ending? A cultural transition enacted with ceremony and foresight, as has been seen in other Andean societies? Or was it a slow erosion of autonomy, of memory, of a people's place in the world? A more speculative thread suggests that the Chiribaya were not merely absorbed or displaced, but may have retreated, leaving behind only what was meant to remain. Some scholars have proposed that their elite lineages withdrew further inland or higher into the Andes, preserving certain customs under new names. Could traces of Chiribaya identity still survive in communities whose roots have been mislabeled or overlooked? Even their name is not original. It was assigned by modern archaeologists, drawn from a local geographical term. What the Chiribaya called themselves, what they believed, what stories they told to one another under desert stars, are unknown. Still, the desert remembers. In the sunken walls of ancient irrigation canals, in fragments of dyed thread preserved in the dry earth, in silent cemeteries where the dead still sit, wrapped in woven cloth, surrounded by vessels once filled with offerings of corn, fish, or water. Today, the winds that sweep through the valleys of southern Peru carry more than dust. They carry the breath of a people who lived in harmony with one of the world's harshest landscapes and left behind a legacy of balance, resilience, and quiet disappearance. As we turn from the forgotten graves of the Chiribaya and continue into the shadows of ancient worlds, one question rises with the wind. What does it mean for a civilization to vanish not in flames, but in stillness? And how much can we learn from those who chose to leave without a word? In the lowland plains of the Bolivian Amazon, where thick forests stretch endlessly across a patchwork of rivers, wetlands, and savannas, a forgotten civilization once shaped the land with an intelligence both vast and invisible. Beneath the canopy, where the jungle swallows sound and light, lie the buried remains of cities, grids of causeways, canals, and monumental platforms that for centuries were mistaken for nothing more than natural rises in the terrain. This is the legacy of the Casarabe culture, a lost world that sculpted its environment with subtle grandeur, then disappeared into the undergrowth, leaving almost no trace of its passing. Only recently have the full outlines of Casarabe society begun to re-emerge. For decades, archaeologists suspected there was more to the Llanos de Mojos region than met the eye. But it wasn't until the early 21st century, with the use of LiDAR, laser-based scanning from aircraft, that the true scale of this civilization became clear. Beneath the dense vegetation, researchers uncovered vast urban networks, sprawling settlements interconnected by raised roads, water channels, reservoirs, and geometric mounds. The scale was astonishing. Unlike the stone empires of the Andes, the Casarabe built with earth and vision. They didn't carve into mountains, they reshaped floodplains. From around 500 AD to 1400 AD, they engineered landscapes the size of modern cities. Some settlements were over 300 hectares in size, anchored by platform mounds rising up to 20 meters high, surrounded by concentric defensive structures. These were not isolated villages. They were urban centers, carefully planned, hydrologically optimized, and culturally complex. And then, they were gone. Who were these builders of the Amazon's hidden cities? How did they organize themselves, and why did their culture fade into silence? The Casarabe people remain elusive. We know little about their language, their rulers, or their beliefs. No written records survive, no stelae, no codices. But the scale and precision of their construction suggest an organized society, capable of coordinating labor, managing water, and sustaining large populations in a seasonally flooded environment. Their economy likely revolved around agriculture, fishing, and the careful manipulation of wetlands. Raised fields, dikes, and canals transformed the floodplains into productive zones. Some of the massive causeways stretch in perfectly straight lines for kilometers, connecting settlements across an otherwise impassable terrain. Water reservoirs were dug with exacting dimensions, designed not only for storage, but possibly also for ritual use. It's a model of civilization that doesn't fit easily into conventional frameworks. No massive temples, no imperial warfare, no stone fortresses. Instead, a civilization that worked with the landscape, not against it. But despite their achievements, the Casarabe left no direct descendants. Their culture faded before the arrival of the Spanish, and by the time European chroniclers entered the region, the cities were already reclaimed by forest. Why? One theory points to environmental shifts. The Llanos de Mojos is a delicate ecosystem, prone to flooding and drought. A changing climate, perhaps a prolonged dry period or a series of destructive floods, may have disrupted food production, forced migrations, or triggered internal instability. Another possibility is disease. Even before the Spanish arrived in full force, diseases like smallpox may have spread ahead of colonial contact, devastating populations and collapsing complex societies in their wake. But these explanations, while plausible, do not fully account for the depth of the silence left behind. Other Amazonian societies, though diminished, survived into colonial memory. Why did the Casarabe leave no oral tradition, no name, no legend preserved among neighboring peoples? Some researchers suggest that the Casarabe society may have been decentralized, less dependent on a central authority, more reliant on local leadership and cooperative organization. In this model, when external pressures mounted, the networks unraveled quietly, without war or conquest. People may have dispersed into smaller communities, adapted, and blended into the broader mosaic of Amazonian cultures. There are even more speculative ideas. Could their cities have had a ceremonial or cosmological function, aligned with star paths, built to mirror constellations, or serve as living calendars? Some of the settlements exhibit a strange geometric regularity. Were they not just practical centers, but sacred landscapes? And if so, did their abandonment reflect not failure, but transformation? A shift in belief, or the fulfillment of a cycle? We may never know. Yet the very fact that such a civilization existed, vast, organized, and hidden in plain sight, challenges long-held assumptions about the Amazon. For years, it was believed that the rainforest could not support large-scale human societies. The Casarabe proved otherwise. They reimagined space and time on their own terms, creating a civilization without stone, without empires, without monuments in the traditional sense. And yet their work endures, silently, in the perfectly aligned causeways now swallowed by jungle, in the raised mounds still visible from the air, in the canals that still catch the rain, centuries after their makers disappeared. As we leave behind the shadowy blue-green maps of Casarabe cityscapes and press forward through the fading echoes of ancient lives, one final question lingers like fog over the forest canopy. What other civilizations, vast and invisible, lie just beneath the surface of what we think we know, waiting, patiently, to be seen again? In the rolling hills of Gyeongju, South Korea, royal tombs rise like sleeping giants, green mounds beneath which gold crowns, jade ornaments, and ancient scrolls have lain undisturbed for centuries. These are the burial sites of Silla, one of the longest-lasting dynasties in East Asia. And beneath these quiet, grassy domes rests not just royalty, but the echoes of a society governed by one of the most rigid and mysterious social hierarchies ever devised, the bone rank system. To the untrained eye, the artifacts of Silla, delicate earrings, golden belts, elaborately curved swords, speak of splendor and ceremony. But beneath the surface of these luxuries was a system so strictly defined that one's status, marriage, clothing, career, and even architectural choices were determined not by wealth or merit, but by blood. The bone rank system divided Silla society into hereditary strata, deeply ingrained and unyielding. At the top was sacred bone, a status so rare that only a handful of individuals ever held it at any given time. Below them, the true bone rank included aristocratic families eligible for high office and royal marriage. Beneath that were the head ranks, numbered 6 through 1, each with its own rights, restrictions, and limitations. And for most, those ranks would never change. This wasn't merely class, it was caste, codified into law and belief, rooted in the body and passed through generations. But how did such a system emerge? And why, after dominating Silla life for centuries, did it quietly disappear? The origins of the bone rank system are difficult to trace. Some scholars believe it evolved from tribal leadership structures, solidified over time as the Silla Kingdom expanded. Others suggest it was influenced by ancient animist beliefs, where lineage and spiritual purity were seen as inseparable. But the earliest written records referring to the system only appear centuries after it was likely established, leaving much to speculation. What is clear is that the system was deeply integrated into governance. Only those of certain ranks could serve in court, wear specific colors, ride in particular carriages, or build homes with certain dimensions. The higher the rank, the greater the privilege, but also, perhaps, the greater the isolation. Royal succession, too, was dictated by bone rank. A king could only be chosen from sacred or true bone lineages, which often led to political deadlock. If no eligible candidate existed, succession crises followed. And as Silla expanded and absorbed neighboring territories like Bactria and Goguryeo, integrating new elites into this rigid structure proved increasingly difficult. One of the strangest aspects of the system is how little resistance to it is recorded. Did the people of Silla accept this hierarchy as divine order? Did it provide stability or suffocation? Some theorists suggest that the bone rank system's endurance may have rested not on fear or force, but on a shared cosmology, a worldview in which social order mirrored celestial order. To be born into a rank was to inherit a role, a position in a cosmic framework. Change, rebellion, or ambition beyond one's rank would have been seen not just as disloyalty, but as a violation of harmony. And yet, for all its longevity, the system eventually faded. By the late 9th century, cracks were beginning to show. Power struggles among the true bone elites intensified. Ambitious families sought influence outside of official channels. The rise of Buddhist monastic institutions offered alternative sources of prestige and learning. And as regional lords, Hojok, began to accumulate power through military means, the authority of the central aristocracy eroded. When the Silla dynasty collapsed in 935 AD, giving way to the Goryeo dynasty, the bone rank system effectively vanished. The new rulers, while drawing on Silla's legacy, never reinstated it in full. The once all-encompassing structure simply ended. Why? Some historians argue that the system, while effective in its time, became a victim of its own rigidity. As social mobility became essential in a rapidly changing world, the inflexible hierarchy of bone ranks could no longer meet the demands of governance, military leadership, or diplomacy. Others believe that internal contradictions, such as the lack of eligible successors or the exclusion of talented individuals, gradually undermined the state from within. More speculative voices have questioned whether the system was ever as absolute as later records describe. Could it have been more fluid in practice? A symbolic code rather than a strict social prison? Or did its disappearance reflect not failure, but evolution? A transition from metaphysical hierarchy to administrative pragmatism? Even today, the full mechanics of the bone rank system remain only partially understood. Archaeologists continue to unearth tombs, analyzing burial goods and skeletal remains in search of patterns, trying to match rank with artifact, lineage with power. Some tombs are lavish, filled with imported goods and intricate jewelry. Others are more modest, yet show traces of ritual significance. What did these differences mean? And who decided? There are no surviving documents from Silla that define the rules in full. The system's boundaries, criteria, and even terminology are reconstructed from later texts, compiled centuries after Silla's fall. Could our understanding itself be incomplete, shaped more by legend than law? As we turn from the grassy tombs of Gyeongju and continue through the long shadows of forgotten civilizations, one quiet question remains. What kind of world builds a society not on conquest or coin, but on the very marrow of birth? And what happens when the bloodlines run dry? In the high valleys of the Hindu Kush, where snow-capped peaks pierce the sky and glacial rivers run through steep, narrow gorges, time seems to move differently. The wind carries voices from distant ages. Wooden shrines, carved with animal motifs and crowned with goat horns, stand quietly in stone-walled villages. Here, in the remote reaches of what is now northern Pakistan, live the Kalasha people, keepers of an ancient tradition, guardians of a story that reaches back to a forgotten kingdom whose name, if it ever had one, is no longer known. The Kalasha are often described as a unique remnant of a pre-Islamic Indo-European culture. Today, they number only a few thousand, residing in the isolated valleys of Bumbure, Rumbur, and Birir. Their customs, language, and spiritual beliefs are radically different from those of the surrounding region. Their festivals follow the rhythms of the sun and moon. Their gods live in the mountains and rivers. Their women dress in black woolen robes adorned with shells and beads. Their men still sing songs that echo of long journeys, distant wars, and ancestral kings. But the Kalasha are not a living fossil. They are the surviving echo of something much larger, something once powerful, once sovereign. A kingdom, perhaps, high in the mountains, lost to time. What happened to it? Historians and archaeologists have long debated the origin of the Kalasha and the ancient civilization they are believed to descend from. Some trace their roots to Indo-Aryan migrations, perhaps arriving in these mountains over 3,000 years ago. Others believe they are descendants of a local culture that predates written history, a people whose beliefs, language, and mythology reflect the Indo-Iranian world in its earliest form. Still, others suggest a connection to the armies of Alexander the Great. The Kalasha themselves have stories of fair-skinned ancestors, warrior lineages, and foreign blood. Could remnants of the Macedonian army have stayed behind, founding a hybrid kingdom in these inaccessible valleys? While the Greek theory has been largely set aside by modern scholars, it persists in part because so much remains unknown. Genetic studies show the Kalasha are distinct from their neighbors, though not of pure European origin. Linguistic ties link their language to the Dardic branch of Indo-Aryan tongues, but the precise lineage is complex and fragmented. More telling is their religion. The Kalasha pantheon bears striking resemblances to ancient Vedic and pre-Zoroastrian belief systems. Their chief god, Dezau, is a sky father. Ritual purity is central to their way of life. Seasonal festivals mark solstices and equinoxes. Sacred groves are kept untouched by human hand. Animal sacrifices are made during key ceremonies, practices once common in early Indo-European societies, but now extinct in the regions around them. Such cultural preservation suggests that the Kalasha did not simply wander into these valleys. They may have once ruled them. Scattered archaeological remains, stone fortresses on inaccessible cliffs, ancient trails, and ruins of watchtowers hint at a more expansive past. Oral histories speak of lost valleys, forgotten allies, and wars with distant empires. Could the Kalasha be the last survivors of a highland kingdom that once extended far beyond their current borders? If so, what caused its fall? One possibility is geographic isolation itself. As trade routes shifted and empires grew to the south and west, the mountain kingdoms of the Hindu Kush may have been cut off, economically, politically, and culturally. Small, local powers collapsed into fragmented communities. The lowland civilizations wrote their histories. The highland ones were forgotten. Another theory points to pressure from surrounding powers. Over centuries, waves of invaders moved through this region: Persians, Greeks, Scythians, Kushans, Turks, and Mongols. Each brought new faiths, new rulers, and new demands. Perhaps the ancient Kalasha kingdom resisted too long, and when it finally fell, its memory was erased, intentionally or otherwise. Others suggest that natural disaster may have played a role. Earthquakes, floods, or glacial shifts could have wiped out key settlements, forcing survivors to retreat deeper into the mountains. Cut off from one another, once unified tribes may have splintered into isolated valley communities, preserving fragments of a much older whole. More speculative voices have asked if the Kalasha kingdom was never meant to last, not as a political power, but as a spiritual refuge. A place built to remain hidden, deliberately remote. A people who chose seclusion over conquest, who measured greatness not in cities or armies, but in ritual and continuity. Whatever the truth, the ancient Kalasha kingdom, if it existed, left few physical traces. No grand temples, no royal tombs, no written records. And yet, its presence lingers. In the chants sung under starlight, in the wooden effigies carved for forgotten deities, in the rhythm of drums during solstice festivals that predate the monsoon calendars of the valleys below. And so, the Kalasha remain, fragile, proud, and enduring. A living mystery nestled in the folds of the Hindu Kush. The last voice, perhaps, of a vanished world that once spoke across the mountains with clarity and power. As we turn from these narrow, stone-lined paths and continue our search for civilizations lost to silence, one question remains like a fading echo among the peaks. If the Kalasha are the last light of an ancient kingdom, what deeper fire once burned? And why did the world allow it to go dark? Along the banks of the Nile, carved into temple walls and faded limestone reliefs, is the story of a land both exotic and elusive. A place ancient Egyptians called Ta Netjer, the land of the gods. There, Incense trees bloomed in sacred groves, strange animals wandered shaded glades, and gold, ebony, and aromatic resins flowed from distant shores into the temples of Thebes and Karnak. This was Punt, a kingdom whispered about in hieroglyphs, depicted in meticulous murals, but never found. A land once real, now lost in time. The earliest references to Punt appear during Egypt's 5th dynasty, around 2500 BC. Egyptian texts describe it as a partner in trade, not a rival in war. Expeditions were launched by pharaohs and their priesthoods, not to conquer, but to acquire myrrh, frankincense, electrum, leopard skins, baboons, and even live trees to be replanted in temple gardens. In the reign of Queen Hatshepsut, an expedition to Punt was so celebrated that it was immortalized in stone at her mortuary temple in Deir el-Bahri. On those walls, the scenes are vivid: ships laden with cargo, delegates greeted by Puntite rulers, a queen with distinctive features, and houses on stilts shaded by palm trees. The imagery is rich, and yet, the land itself remains unfound. Where was Punt? Scholars have proposed many theories. Some place it along the Horn of Africa, modern-day Eritrea or Somalia, citing botanical matches, animal distributions, and linguistic clues. Others point to southern Arabia, where frankincense trees still grow and trade routes once flourished. A few even suggest Nubia or Sudan, but there is no consensus. The geography of Punt is a shifting shadow, its location buried beneath layers of trade, memory, and time. Why did such an important trading partner, one that Egyptian priests considered sacred, disappear so completely? One possibility is that Punt was never a single kingdom, but rather a confederation of coastal polities, united only in Egyptian imagination. In this view, Punt's disappearance is not a collapse, but a gradual fading. As independent ports declined, trade shifted northward, and Egypt turned its attention to other regions. Without monumental cities or enduring stone architecture, Punt may have simply slipped beneath the waves of history, absorbed into new cultures, renamed by new rulers. Others propose that Punt's fall was tied to climate. Shifts in monsoon patterns, the desiccation of once fertile lands, or rising sea levels may have disrupted its agricultural base and seaborne trade. In regions where survival depended on delicate environmental balance, even minor changes could dismantle economies and scatter populations. And yet, deeper mysteries remain. Why are there no surviving Puntite texts? No stelae, no inscriptions, no burial mounds proclaiming the names of kings? If Punt was wealthy enough to trade with one of the world's most powerful empires, where is its own legacy? Was it a literate society whose records were destroyed, or was writing never part of its tradition? Some archaeologists believe remnants of Punt may already have been discovered, but remain unrecognized. Scattered pottery fragments, burial sites, or seaports yet to be linked definitively to the Egyptian narratives. Excavations along the Red Sea coast and interior highlands continue to offer tantalizing glimpses: incense altars, obsidian tools, ancient harbor walls. But none bear the unmistakable signature: this was Punt. More speculative voices go further still. Could Punt have been a sacred realm, not just in economic terms, but in religious geography? For the Egyptians, it was the land of the gods, the origin of incense used in temple rituals, the source of divine smells, sacred animals, and spiritual purity. Was Punt not merely a kingdom, but a mythologized space, part real, part imagined, whose memory merged with Egyptian cosmology? Or perhaps Punt was deliberately hidden? A few theorists have suggested that the secrecy surrounding Punt was intentional, that Egypt, valuing its rare and sacred imports, obscured the location to prevent rivals from reaching it. In this reading, The absence of Punt in other ancient records is not coincidence, but strategy, a veil drawn across a treasured route. Even the images at Deir el-Bahri offer clues and contradictions. The depiction of the Puntite queen, notably different in appearance, has led to endless debate. Was she simply shown with artistic exaggeration, or do her features reflect a specific ethnic group? Do the houses on stilts reflect a coastal swamp, or a symbolic realm beyond the known world? Still, for all the theories, the truth remains buried. Punt, if it existed as a centralized state, may have been lost not to war or disaster, but to obscurity. A place of trees, scents, and wind-borne sails, preserved not in ruins, but in memory. Its name survived through the Egyptians alone. And when the Nile's power waned, so too did the world's last link to Punt. Today, we search not for a city, but for a silence. We follow trade winds and temple carvings. We trace routes through deserts and across seas. And we listen to the absence, to the mystery, to the places where the maps still say unknown. As we move on from the sacred ships of Deir el-Bahri and the incense-laden wind of forgotten voyages, one final question rises like smoke from a distant altar. If Punt was real, and the Egyptians knew its ports and palaces, how could a kingdom so cherished by gods disappear without a single word of its own?